You need to move out. My sister is pregnant, and she can't have an outsider in my home. That's what my wife said. In my house. That I bought with my parents' life insurance. Look, I'm not saying I'm employee of the year material, but I'd been busting my ass for 6 solid months trying to land this promotion. We're talking late nights that turned into early mornings, takeout dinners eaten cold at my desk, because I forgot they existed, and enough caffeine pumping through my veins to power a small European country. My sleep schedule was basically a suggestion at that point, and I'm pretty sure my coworkers thought I'd moved into the office because they kept finding me there at ungodly hours, squinting at spreadsheets like they held the secrets to eternal life. So when my boss finally called me into his office and told me the position was mine, I didn't just feel relieved. I felt vindicated. All those sacrifices, all those missed happy hours and canceled weekend plans, all the times I chose Excel over sleep, it had finally paid off. I wanted to celebrate properly, you know? Pop some champagne. Maybe go to that steakhouse downtown where they serve portions big enough to feed a family of 4. Really live it up for once. But my wife Lydia had other ideas. We should have a dinner party, she said, already scrolling through her contacts like she was assembling the Avengers. Nothing too fancy, just family. My parents would love to celebrate with us, and we haven't seen Carla and Dean in forever. The way she said us should have been my first red flag, but I was riding high on that promotion dopamine, so I agreed. Sure, why not? A nice family dinner sounded wholesome, normal even. I figured we'd eat some good food, accept some congratulations, maybe endure an awkward toast from my father-in-law Frank, and call it a night. So we went all out. I'm talking full Pinterest mom mode here. Lydia set the table with the fancy plates we got as wedding gifts and had literally never used because apparently we'd been saving them for some mythical special occasion that never came. She lit candles, the expensive ones that smell like autumn harvest or coastal breeze or whatever marketing genius comes up with those names. She even folded the napkins into those weird swan shapes that look impressive but are completely impractical. The whole setup looked like something out of a magazine spread, the kind where everything's so perfect you know nobody actually lives there. Her parents showed up first, because of course they did. Frank and Martha, the punctuality police, arrived exactly 15 minutes early like they always do, which meant we were still frantically arranging things while trying to make it look like we'd been calmly ready for hours. Then came Carla and Dean, my sister-in-law and her husband, who I'd always thought were relatively normal people. Dean worked in accounting, liked football, made decent small talk about the weather and gas prices, your standard, harmless brother-in-law type. Carla was a teacher, always talking about her students and their latest drama, which honestly could be entertaining in small doses. The dinner started off fine, I guess. We made it through the appetizers without incident, discussed the promotion with the appropriate level of enthusiasm, and I even managed to laugh at Frank's terrible dad jokes about climbing the corporate ladder and moving up in the world. Everything seemed perfectly normal, almost boring in that comfortable family dinner kind of way. I remember thinking, maybe this was a good idea after all. Then we got to dessert, and Lydia's mom started asking Carla about baby names, which was weird, because as far as I knew, Carla wasn't pregnant. But there she was, glowing and rubbing her belly with this serene smile, talking about Madison or Sophia, or one of those names that every other kid born in the last decade has. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth with a piece of chocolate cake that suddenly didn't look so appetizing, feeling this weird tension building in the room like everyone knew something I didn't. That's when Lydia cleared her throat in that specific way that means she's about to say something she's been rehearsing. You know that throat clear? The one that's less, excuse me, I have a tickle, and more. I'm about to drop a bomb, and I've been practicing this speech in the mirror. My stomach dropped before she even opened her mouth because I just knew, that whatever came next was going to suck. So, Lydia began, looking at her plate instead of at me, which was red flag number 2000. We've been talking, and we think it would be best if you moved out for a while. She said it so casually, like she was suggesting we try a new restaurant or switch to a different brand of laundry detergent. My sister is pregnant, and she really needs a calm, stress-free environment to recover after the baby comes. She can't have an outsider in my home during such a delicate time. I blinked. Then I blinked again, because surely I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? You're home. The words came out slower than I intended, each one carefully pronounced because my brain was still trying to process what I'd just heard. You mean the house I bought? The one I purchased with my parents' life insurance money after they died. That home. The silence that followed was the kind you could cut with a knife. Hell, you could have cut it with a spoon. Even the fork in my hand seemed to freeze mid-air, like it was as shocked as I was, and wanted to just piece out of this situation entirely. I looked around the table, at Frank, who suddenly found his napkin fascinating. At Martha, who was doing that thing where she presses her lips together real tight. At Dean, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and hide. And at Carla, who had the audacity to look mildly annoyed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. An outsider? I repeated, because apparently, we were just going to gloss over the whole my home thing. I'm your husband. I've been your husband for 3 years. I'm the guy whose name is on the mortgage, the deed, and every utility bill. But sure, yeah, I'm the outsider here. Lydia sighed like I was being difficult, like I was the one causing a scene at what was supposed to be MY celebration dinner. Don't be dramatic, she said. Carla needs support right now, and you're at work all day anyway. It just makes sense. Makes sense. Those 2 words rattled around in my brain like marbles in an empty jar. What made sense was celebrating my promotion in my own house without being told I needed to pack up and leave. What made sense was my wife supporting me instead of conspiring with her family to kick me out. What made sense was literally anything other than what was happening right now. I set down my fork carefully because at that moment, I didn't trust myself not to throw it across the room. Let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice as level as possible. You invited me to a dinner party to celebrate MY promotion, just to tell me I need to move out of MY house so your sister can have a calm environment. Did I wake up in the Twilight Zone? Is this punked? Where's Ashton Kutcher? Nobody laughed. Nobody even cracked a smile. They all just sat there looking at me like I was the problem, like I was being selfish for not immediately agreeing to this insane plan. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment suggestion. This was planned, coordinated. They'd all discussed this before coming over, probably had a whole group chat about it, maybe even rehearsed their arguments. This entire dinner was an ambush disguised as a celebration, and I'd walked right into it like an idiot, holding a bottle of expensive wine and a smile. The chocolate cake sat untouched on my plate, mocking me with its perfect frosting swirls, while my promotion, my hard-earned, sleep-deprived, 6 months of hell promotion, became nothing more than background noise to the main event. My wife and her family trying to evict me from my own damn house. Best celebration ever. So apparently, the moment Carla peed on that little plastic stick and saw 2 pink lines, she was automatically upgraded to some kind of untouchable deity. I'm talking full-blown royal treatment here, like she'd been personally appointed by the Queen of England. Or maybe Beyoncé, since that seems to be Lydia's actual higher power. Suddenly, every conversation in my house revolved around what Carla needed, what Carla wanted, what would make Carla most comfortable during her delicate condition. Never mind that women have been having babies since, oh I don't know, the literal beginning of human existence, and most of them managed to do it without commandeering someone else's house like it was a hostile corporate takeover. The morning after that disastrous dinner party, Lydia sat me down with this dead serious expression like she was about to explain quantum physics to a golden retriever. Carla needs to recover in a quiet space after the baby comes, she said, her hands folded in her lap, all prim and proper. Somewhere peaceful, away from stress and negative energy. The way she emphasized negative energy while looking directly at me made it pretty clear who she thought was the main source of said negativity. Spoiler alert, it was me, the guy who'd been stupid enough to think his own home was actually his own home. But here's where it got really good. Lydia launched into this whole spiritual wellness speech that sounded like she'd been binge-watching too many YouTube videos about crystal healing and chakra alignment. Apparently, the baby, who, let me remind you, hadn't even been born yet and was currently about the size of a large avocado, needed a positive male-free aura to thrive. I'm not making this up. Those were actual words that came out of my wife's mouth with complete sincerity, like she was citing peer-reviewed medical research instead of something she probably read on some mommy blog run by someone named Moonbeam, who sells essential oils out of her garage. I sat there for a solid 10 seconds, just processing this absolute nonsense, before I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, but a full-on, head thrown back, belly laugh that probably could have been heard by the neighbors. A male-free aura? I managed to get out between gasps. So what's the plan here exactly? You're going to turn my office, you know, the one I actually use for work, into some kind of pastel-colored nursery? And what am I supposed to do? Just hover outside the house like some kind of toxic ghost? Should I start identifying as furniture so I can stay? Would that work with your spiritual consultant? Lydia was not amused. Her lips pressed into that thin line that meant I was supposed to be taking this seriously, but honestly, how could anyone take this seriously? We were talking about evicting a fully grown man from his own property because a fetus supposedly needed better vibes. If this was a movie plot, critics would pan it for being too unrealistic. That's when Carla herself chimed in from the living room, where she'd apparently been lounging on my couch, like Cleopatra on her barge. She placed one hand delicately on her stomach, which, by the way, barely even showed yet, and whispered in this breathy, martyr-like voice, "Stress isn't good for the baby." She said it like she was delivering the final line in an Oscar-worthy performance, all tragic and wounded, as if my very presence in my own house was somehow equivalent to exposing her unborn child to radioactive waste. "Oh, trust me," I shot back, unable to stop myself. "The baby's not the only one stressed right now. In fact, I'd venture to say the guy being kicked out of his own house might be experiencing just a teensy bit of stress too. But hey, what do I know? I'm just the outsider with the mortgage payments." Carla gasped like I'd just suggested drowning puppies, her hand flying to her chest in that dramatic way that would have made a soap opera actress proud. "How can you be so insensitive?" she breathed. "I'm carrying a life inside me. A precious, innocent life that deserves nothing but peace and harmony." "You know what else deserves peace and harmony?" I said, standing up because I couldn't sit still anymore. "The guy who bought this house with his dead parents' life insurance money. That guy would really appreciate some peace and harmony too, preferably in the home he legally owns and pays for every single month." Lydia shot me a look that could have frozen hell over. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said in that condescending tone that made me want to bang my head against the wall. "We're all just trying to do what's best for the baby." "Harder? Harder? Lady, you were literally trying to evict me from property that had my name on the deed, and I was supposed to just smile and pack my bags like I was checking out of a hotel?" The audacity was truly breathtaking. I had to admire it, in a way. It took real confidence to tell someone to leave their own house, and then act like they were the unreasonable one for objecting. "So let me paint you a picture of what I'm hearing," I said, crossing my arms and leaning against the doorframe. "Carla here, who has her own house with her own husband, needs to move into my house because apparently her house doesn't have the right feng shui or whatever. And I, the actual owner of this property, need to find somewhere else to live because my masculine energy is apparently toxic to a fetus. Do I have that right? Is that the game plan we're going with?" Lydia sighed heavily, like I was a difficult child who wasn't understanding simple instructions. "It's not forever," she said, as if that made it better. "Just until the baby is born and Carla gets back on her feet. A few months, tops." "A few months," I repeated flatly. "And where exactly am I supposed to live during these few months? Should I pitch a tent in the backyard? Maybe sleep in my car? Ooh, I know. I could rent a motel room with my promotion money. The money I earned from that job I've been killing myself at. That sounds fun and financially responsible." "You could stay with your brother," Lydia suggested, like she'd really thought this through and had all the answers. "Or get a short-term apartment lease. Lots of people do it. Lots of people do it," I echoed, feeling my blood pressure rising to dangerous levels. "Lots of people get kicked out of their own homes by their wives so their pregnant sisters-in-law can play house. Is that a common thing now? Is there a support group I should join?" Carla made this wounded noise from the couch, her eyes getting all watery like she was about to cry. "I didn't realize I was such a burden," she said softly, because of course she was going to play the victim card. "I just thought family was supposed to help each other. But if my presence is such an inconvenience—" "Oh no, don't do that," I said, holding up my hand. "Don't twist this around like I'm the bad guy here. Your presence isn't the problem. The problem is that you want to move into my house and kick me out of it. Those are two very different things. If you wanted to visit for a weekend, great. If you needed help with something, awesome. But taking over my entire house and treating me like I'm trespassing? That's not family helping each other. That's a hostile takeover with a pregnancy as the excuse. Lydia stood up then, her jaw set in that stubborn way that meant this argument was far from over. We're doing this, she stated flatly. Carla needs us, and we're going to be there for her. If you can't understand that, then maybe you need to take a long look at what kind of person you really are. And there it was, the emotional manipulation cherry on top of this absurd sundry. Suddenly, I wasn't just refusing to give up my house. I was failing some kind of moral test, proving myself to be selfish and uncaring. Never mind that I'd worked my ass off for months to get a promotion we both benefited from. Never mind that I'd bought this house in the first place, creating a home for us with money that came from the worst moment of my life. None of that mattered now because I wasn't willing to become homeless for the royal fetus and its mother. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and wondered when exactly she decided that her sister's comfort was more important than her husband's basic right to live in his own home. When had that shift happened? Had it always been there, lurking under the surface, just waiting for the right excuse to emerge? Wow, I finally said, because what else was there to say? Just wow. The next morning, I woke up hoping that maybe, just maybe, the previous night had been some kind of stress-induced fever dream brought on by too much work and not enough sleep. You know that feeling when you wake up after a nightmare and you're like, thank God none of that was real. Yeah, I was really banking on that. But nope. Reality came crashing back the moment I smelled bacon cooking downstairs and heard Lydia humming in the kitchen. And not just any humming. She was humming Independent Women by Destiny's Child, that song about throwing your hands up at me, buying her own diamonds and rings, and basically not needing a man for anything. The irony was so thick I could have spread it on toast. Here was my wife, humming about financial independence in the house that I bought with my money, cooking breakfast with groceries I paid for, getting ready to kick me out so her sister could move in rent-free. Beyoncé would be so proud. I laid there for a solid 5 minutes, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was actually my life or if I'd somehow stumbled into an alternate dimension where logic didn't exist and married men got evicted from their own homes for having the audacity to possess testosterone. I dragged myself out of bed and headed downstairs, still clinging to some stupid hope that maybe we could have a rational conversation about this whole situation. Maybe in the light of day, with some coffee and a clear head, Lydia would realize how absolutely insane this plan was. Maybe she'd laugh and say, "Oh my God, what were we thinking last night? That was crazy. Let's forget the whole thing." Spoiler alert, that's not what happened. She was standing at the stove, flipping pancakes like everything was totally normal, like she hadn't just tried to evict her own husband the night before. She was wearing my old college t-shirt and her hair was up in one of those messy buns that somehow looked cute on her. And for a second, just a second, I remembered why I'd married her in the first place. Then she smiled at me and said, "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" And the illusion shattered completely because apparently we were just going to pretend that last night didn't happen. "Actually, no," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee that I desperately needed if I was going to survive this conversation. "I didn't sleep well. Turns out getting kicked out of your own house really messes with your REM cycles. Who knew?" I couldn't help the sarcasm. It was my default defense mechanism at this point, the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. Lydia set down her spatula and turned to face me with this patient expression, like she was a kindergarten teacher dealing with a difficult child who wouldn't share his crayons. "You're being dramatic again," she said, shaking her head. "We talked about this. It's just temporary. It's not that big of a deal." "Not that big of a deal," I repeated, taking a long sip of my coffee because I needed a second to process the sheer audacity of that statement. Right? Yeah, getting kicked out of the house you own is totally no big deal. Happens all the time. I bet there's a whole subreddit dedicated to it. Maybe I should start a blog. 30 Days of Homelessness, brought to you by my in-laws. She rolled her eyes, which was apparently her new favorite response to anything I said. "Stop being sarcastic. You're not going to be homeless. We already talked about this. You can stay with your brother, or get a short-term rental, or there are plenty of extended stay hotels that are actually pretty nice." Oh, extended stay hotels. How could I forget? I set my coffee mug down harder than necessary. That's exactly what I want to do with my promotion money. Blow it all on a hotel room while my wife and her sister throw a baby shower in my living room. That sounds like a fantastic use of my resources. It's not forever, Lydia said, turning back to the pancakes. You can move back in after Carla has the baby and get settled. A few months, tops. And honestly, you're gone so much for work anyway, you probably won't even notice. I stared at her back, watching her flip pancakes with casual ease, and something inside me just snapped. Not in an angry way, but more like a clarity way, like someone had suddenly turned on all the lights in a dark room, and I could finally see what had been there all along. When exactly can I move back in? I asked, keeping my voice calm and level. Give me a specific timeline here. When does Carla plan to leave? Lydia shrugged, still not looking at me. After the baby's born and she's recovered. Like I said, a few months. Define recovered, I pressed. Are we talking 6 weeks? 3 months? 6 months? A year? Because recovered is pretty vague, and I've got a sneaking suspicion that the goalposts are going to keep moving here. First, it's until the baby's born. Then it's until she's recovered. Then it's until the baby's sleeping through the night. Then it's until the baby's walking. Then it's until the kid graduates high school. When does it end, Lydia? She spun around then, the spatula in her hand like a weapon. Why are you being so difficult about this? It's my sister. She's pregnant. She needs help. I don't understand why you can't just be supportive for once in your life. For once in my life? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've been supportive our entire marriage. I supported you when you wanted to quit your job to find yourself. I supported you when you spent $3,000 on that pottery class you wanted twice. I supported you when you decided we needed to redecorate the entire house even though there was nothing wrong with it. I've been nothing but supportive. But asking me to give up my house, the house I bought with my parents' life insurance money, the last tangible thing I have from them. So your sister can play house? That's not support. That's self-destruction. Lydia's eyes got that dangerous glint in them, the one that meant she was about to say something she knew would hurt. Your parents would want you to help family, she said quietly, and damn if that didn't hit exactly where she intended it to. Don't, I said, my voice tight. Don't you dare use my dead parents to manipulate me into giving up the one thing they left me. That's low, even for this situation. I'm just saying. No, I cut her off. You don't get to just say anything about my parents. They left me that money so I could have security, so I could build a life. They didn't leave it to me so I could fund your sister's extended vacation in a house that she has zero claim to. The kitchen went silent except for the sizzle of pancakes burning on the stove. Lydia grabbed the pan and moved it off the heat, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd gotten through to her. Maybe she'd realize how messed up this whole situation was. Instead, she set the pan down and said, "You can stay until next week. That should give you enough time to find somewhere to go." I nearly choked on my coffee. Next week? Oh, fantastic. A whole 7 days to pack up my life and find a new place to live. That's so generous of you. Should I send you a thank you card? Maybe some flowers? A fruit basket? Stop being sarcastic, she snapped, which was hilarious because sarcasm was literally the only thing keeping me sane at this point. I'm trying to be reasonable here. Most people would just tell you to leave immediately. Most people, I said slowly, wouldn't be kicking their spouse out of a house that spouse legally owns. Most people would recognize that this is completely insane. Most people would tell their pregnant sister to stay in her own damn house with her own damn husband. Lydia crossed her arms, her jaw set in that stubborn way I'd come to recognize over the years. Carla's house is too small. Dean works from home, and she needs quiet. They don't have a nursery set up. We have the space here. It makes sense. It makes sense, I repeated, feeling like I was stuck in some kind of absurdist play. Okay, let's logic this out. Carla and Dean have their own house. A house they presumably bought or rent because they're adults with jobs. But their house is too small and doesn't have a nursery. So the obvious solution is for them to take over MY house, kick me out, and turn MY office into their nursery. Do I have that right? Is that the master plan? You're oversimplifying things, Lydia said, but she couldn't quite meet my eyes. No, I'm actually simplifying them perfectly, I shot back. You're overcomplicating things by inventing reasons why your sister, who is a grown woman with her own home and husband, needs to move into our house and displace me in the process. If she needs help after the baby's born, cool, I'm all for it. She can visit. We can bring meals. We can babysit. There are approximately 800 different ways to support a new mom that don't involve evicting me from my own property. It's not just my decision, Lydia said, which was a new one. My parents think it's a good idea too. Even Dean agrees. Oh, Dean agrees, I said flatly. The guy who gets to keep living in his own house agrees that I should give up mine. Yeah, I bet he's really torn up about it. I bet he's just devastated that I have to leave while he gets to stay comfortable. The sacrifice must be killing him. Lydia grabbed a plate and started stacking pancakes on it with more force than necessary. Fine. If you feel that way, then fine. But you're still leaving next week. This isn't up for discussion anymore. And there it was. The conversation was over, decided, done. No more debate, no more discussion, just a unilateral declaration that I needed to get out of my own house by next week. I stood there in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, watching my wife make breakfast like she hadn't just given me an eviction notice, and I thought about how quickly things could fall apart. One promotion, one dinner party, one pregnancy announcement, and suddenly I was the outsider in my own home, counting down the days until I had to pack up and leave. Should I book a U-Haul? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Or just pack myself into a suitcase? I want to make sure I'm following proper eviction protocol here. Lydia didn't even look up from her pancakes. Whatever you think is best, she said. And somehow, that was even worse than if she'd yelled. That evening, Lydia's parents showed up at the house unannounced, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a casual visit. Frank and Martha didn't just drop by without a reason. These were people who scheduled their bathroom breaks and planned their grocery trips with military precision. So when I heard the doorbell ring at exactly 7 o'clock, because of course it was exactly 7, and saw them standing on the porch looking all serious and official, I knew I was about to get ambushed for the second time in as many days. We need to talk, Frank said as he walked through the door, not even waiting for an invitation. He was wearing his serious dad outfit, khakis, a polo shirt, and those ridiculous white New Balance sneakers that every middle-aged dad apparently gets issued upon turning 50. Martha followed behind him, carrying what looked like a casserole dish, because apparently we were going to have an intervention with a side of green bean casserole. Nothing says, we're about to tell you how to live your life, quite like uninvited dinner. Lydia ushered them into the living room like she'd been expecting them, which she probably had been because this whole thing reeked of coordination. I stood in the doorway, still holding the beer I'd opened approximately 30 seconds before they arrived, watching this scene unfold and wondering if this was what it felt like to be on trial. Should I hire a lawyer? Was I allowed to have legal representation at a family meeting? Could I plead the fifth? Frank settled himself into my favorite armchair, naturally, and adjusted his glasses in that way that meant he was about to deliver a lecture. Martha perched on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap, looking like she was about to lead a prayer circle. Lydia sat next to her mother, and the three of them stared at me expectantly, waiting for me to sit down so they could begin whatever fresh hell they had planned. So, I said, staying exactly where I was because screw it, this was still my house for another few days. Is this an intervention? Should I be worried? Are we about to talk about my feelings? I took a sip of my beer, maintaining eye contact with Frank because I wasn't about to let him think he had the upper hand here. Frank cleared his throat importantly, like he was about to deliver the State of the Union address. Son, he began, which was already annoying because I wasn't his son and we both knew it. We need to discuss this situation with Carla. I think there's been some misunderstanding about what we're asking of you. Oh, there's been no misunderstanding, I said cheerfully. You want me to move out of my house so your pregnant daughter can move in. I understood that perfectly. Crystal clear, actually. I'd say the communication was excellent. Martha made this little toot-tang sound with her tongue, the one that said she thought I was being difficult. There's no need for that tone, she said gently, which somehow made it worse than if she'd just been openly hostile. We're all family here. We should be able to talk about this calmly. You're right, I agreed, setting my beer down on the coffee table without using a coaster because I was feeling petty. Let's talk about it calmly. Let's calmly discuss why everyone thinks it's totally reasonable for me to give up the house I bought with my dead parents' money so that your daughter, who has her own house, her own husband, and presumably her own furniture, can set up camp here instead. Frank held up his hand like he was directing traffic. Now, let's not get emotional about this. Let's look at the facts. Carla is pregnant. Pregnant women need comfort and support during a very vulnerable time in their lives. Surely you can understand that. Oh, absolutely, I said, nodding enthusiastically. I totally understand that pregnant women need comfort and support. What I don't understand is why that comfort and support has to happen in MY house at the expense of MY living situation. See, that's the part that's tripping me up. Help me understand the logic here, Frank. He shifted in his seat, clearly not expecting pushback. Frank was used to people just nodding along with whatever he said, probably because most people didn't want to deal with the headache of arguing with him. But I was already living in Headache Central, so what did I have to lose? It's not about logic, Martha chimed in, leaning forward with her hands clasped. It's about family. It's about being there for each other when times are hard. Carla shouldn't have to feel like a guest in her condition. She needs to feel safe and secure and welcome. Safe and secure and welcome, I repeated slowly. Got it. And me feeling safe and secure and welcome in the house I actually own. That's not important? Or does that not count because I'm just the guy who signs the mortgage checks? You're being deliberately obtuse, Frank said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Nobody's saying you don't matter. We're saying that right now, in this moment, Carla's needs take priority. It's temporary. A few months. Surely you can make that sacrifice for family. Here's what I'm hearing, I said, starting to pace because I couldn't sit still anymore. I'm hearing that when Lydia needs something, we use my house. When Lydia's sister needs something, we use my house. When Lydia's parents want to have this little intervention, we use my house. But when I need something, like, oh, I don't know, a place to live, suddenly we need to talk about sacrifice and priorities and family obligations. Does that about sum it up? Lydia finally spoke up, her voice tight with frustration. Why are you being so selfish about this? It's not like we're asking you to give up the house forever. We're asking you to be flexible for a few months while your sister-in-law goes through one of the most challenging experiences of her life. Selfish, I said, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. I'm selfish. The guy who worked himself into the ground for 6 months to get a promotion that benefits both of us. The guy who bought this house in the first place, creating a home for us. The guy who's apparently supposed to just pack up and leave because his wife's sister got knocked up. Yeah, I'm the selfish one here. That makes total sense. Frank adjusted his glasses again, which I was starting to realize was his tell when he was about to say something he thought was particularly wise. Son, you must understand. Pregnant women need comfort. They need stability. They need a peaceful environment free from conflict and stress. Right now, with you being so resistant to helping, you're creating exactly the kind of stress that Carla doesn't need. The audacity of that statement actually made me laugh. Wait. Let me make sure I'm following this correctly. Carla needs a stress-free environment. So the solution is to kick me out of my own house, which is definitely stressful for everyone involved. But somehow I'm the one creating stress by pointing out how insane this is? Is that what you're telling me? Because that's some Olympic-level mental gymnastics right there. That's not what I'm saying, Frank protested, but his face was getting red in that way that meant he knew I had a point and he didn't like it. No, I think it is what you're saying. I continued on a roll now. You're saying that Carla's comfort is more important than mine, that her needs supersede my basic right to live in my own house, that her pregnancy somehow gives her the authority to just commandeer my property like it's a spare bedroom at a hotel she's checking into. Martha stood up then, smoothing down her cardigan in that fussy way she had. I think you need to take a step back and really think about what kind of man you want to be, she said, and her tone was so condescending I wanted to throw something. Do you want to be the kind of man who helps his family in their time of need? Or do you want to be the kind of man who puts his own convenience above the well-being of a pregnant woman and her unborn child? Oh, we're doing this, I said, nodding. We're going straight for the guilt trip. Excellent strategy. Really pulling out all the stops here. Let me ask you something. Martha, when Dean decided to marry Carla, did he have to sign away the rights to his own home? Is there some kind of contract I missed where I agreed to give up everything I own the second someone in your family gets pregnant? Nobody's asking you to give up everything, Lydia said, her voice rising. Stop being so dramatic. We're asking for a temporary arrangement to help my sister. That's it. That's all this is. A temporary arrangement in MY house. I emphasized, pointing at the floor. The house I bought. The house I pay for. The house that has my name on the deed. Remember that piece of paper? The legal document that says this property belongs to me. Frank stood up too, trying to reclaim some authority in the situation. Legal ownership isn't everything. Marriage is a partnership. What's yours is hers. What's hers is yours. That's how it works. Funny how that only seems to apply when it benefits her family. I shot back. I don't see you telling Carla that what's hers is mine. I don't see anyone suggesting that maybe Dean should give up his house, so I have somewhere to go. That partnership talk only flows one direction, apparently. Because you're being unreasonable, Martha insisted. Carla can't have an outsider in the house during her recovery period. She needs privacy and peace. Surely you can understand that. There it is again, I said, throwing my hands up. The outsider. I'm the outsider in my own house. The house I bought with the life insurance money from my parents who died in a car accident 3 years ago. But yeah, I'm the outsider. Carla, who's known this house for all of 5 seconds, she's family. She belongs here. Me? I'm just some random dude who happened to purchase the property and maintain it and pay all the bills. The room went quiet after that. Frank and Martha exchanged looks. Lydia stared at her hands, and I stood there feeling like I'd just run a marathon. This was exhausting. Fighting with my wife was exhausting. Fighting with her parents was exhausting. The whole situation was one giant, exhausting mess that I never asked for and didn't know how to fix. Dean, bless him, had been sitting silently in the corner this entire time, probably wishing he was literally anywhere else. Smart man. He hadn't said a single word, just sat there looking uncomfortable while his wife's family tried to strong-arm me into homelessness. I almost respected him for keeping his mouth shut. At least he had the sense to stay out of this dumpster fire. I installed the central air in this house. I said finally, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. Last summer, when it was 95 degrees and Lydia was miserable, I paid for it out of pocket, $3,000 that I saved up for months. And you know what? I didn't ask anyone's permission. I didn't call a family meeting. I just did it because it was my house and I wanted my wife to be comfortable. That's what you do when you own something. You invest in it. You take care of it. You make it better. Frank started to say something, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how we went from me owning this house to me being an outsider in it. That's a pretty big leap, and I'd love to understand the thought process that got us here. After sitting through what felt like an hour of circular logic and emotional manipulation disguised as family values, I'd had enough. There's only so much nonsense a person can take before something inside them snaps, and I'd officially reached my limit. While Frank droned on about sacrifice and Martha nodded along like a bobblehead, I quietly excused myself and walked to my study, leaving them to continue their little intervention without me. I could hear Lydia calling after me, asking where I was going, but I didn't answer. I had a point to make, and I was going to make it in the most dramatic, satisfying way possible. My study was my sanctuary, the one room in the house that was completely mine. I had my desk in there, my books, my diplomas on the wall, and most importantly, my filing cabinet where I kept all the important documents. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out the folder I needed, the one containing the property deed, mortgage documents, and all the paperwork that proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that this house belonged to me. Not to Lydia, not to her family, not to the royal fetus and its mother, just me. I walked back into the living room holding that folder like it was Excalibur, and I was about to pull it from the stone. Everyone stopped talking and looked at me, probably wondering if I was about to have a complete breakdown. Honestly, I was wondering the same thing, but I was too committed to the bid at this point to back down now. I opened the folder, pulled out the property deed with its fancy embossed seal and official-looking signatures, and laid it gently on the coffee table in front of Frank and Martha. It was a power move, sure, but sometimes you've got to fight absurdity with drama. Quick question, I said, my voice unnaturally calm considering the rage simmering just below the surface. I was smiling too, which probably made me look slightly unhinged, but I didn't care. Can someone do me a favor and read the name on this document? Out loud. For the whole class. Frank leaned forward, squinting at the paper through his glasses. His face was doing this interesting journey from confused to uncomfortable to something that looked suspiciously like, oh crap, we didn't think this through. Martha picked up the deed and held it closer, like maybe if she adjusted the distance it would say something different. Carla, who'd been lounging on the couch like Marie Antoinette, suddenly sat up straighter and blinked at the paper like she was trying to decode ancient hieroglyphics. The silence was absolutely golden. I could practically hear the gears grinding in their heads as they tried to figure out how to spin this in a way that still made me the bad guy. It was like watching people try to solve a Rubik's Cube while wearing oven mitts. Technically possible, but ultimately futile and painful to watch. That's right, I said, letting my smile widen into something that definitely crossed the line into slightly manic territory. That name you see right there? The one that's printed in official, legal, can't argue with it text? That's mine. All mine. Not Lydia's. Not Mr. and Mrs. Not the family. Just me. Solo. Population 1. I pointed at the deed for emphasis, even though everyone was already staring at it like it had personally betrayed them. I bought this house with my parents' life insurance money. You know, the money I got after they died in a car accident 3 years ago. The money that was literally the only thing I had left of them besides photographs and grief. Yeah, I used that money, every single penny of it, to buy this house. This house that we're currently sitting in. This house that apparently everyone thinks belongs to the collective family consciousness instead of the guy whose name is on the legal documents. Frank opened his mouth, probably to launch into some speech about how legal ownership doesn't matter when it comes to family or some other Hallmark card nonsense, but I held up my hand. Before we start talking about technicalities and semantics and how it's not about ownership, it's about what's right, let me just say this. It is absolutely about ownership. That's literally what ownership means. I own this house. I pay the mortgage every month. I pay the property taxes. I pay for the utilities, the maintenance, the repairs, and that one time the water heater exploded and flooded the basement. Me. Not we. Not us. Me. Lydia made this sputtering sound from her corner, like a car engine trying and failing to start. That's just a technicality, she managed to get out, and I almost laughed because of course that's where she'd go with this. When facts don't support your argument, just call them technicalities and move on. A technicality? I repeated, picking up the deed and holding it up like Simba in The Lion King. This isn't a technicality. This is a legal document. This is proof of ownership. This is the thing that says when the property tax bill comes, my name is on it. When something breaks, I'm responsible for fixing it. When the mortgage payment is due every month, it comes out of my account. Those aren't technicalities. Those are facts. Cold, hard, legally binding facts. I set the deed back down on the table, making sure it was perfectly centered so everyone could see it clearly. So before we continue this conversation about how I need to move out so Carla can move in, maybe we should establish something really important. Whose house is this, actually? And just to make things crystal clear for anyone who's still confused, the answer is mine. It's my house. I bought it. I own it. And the last time I checked, you can't evict the owner of a property from his own property just because his sister-in-law is pregnant and wants a change of scenery. Frank cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but not quite ready to admit defeat. Son, nobody's saying the house isn't yours legally. Oh good, I interrupted. So we agree that it's my house. Legally. Officially. In every way that actually matters. I'm so glad we've established that. Now, with that in mind, can someone explain to me again why I should leave my own house? Use small words, because apparently I'm too stupid to understand why the person who owns the house should be the one to leave it. Carla made a soft whimpering sound, her hand flying to her stomach in that dramatic gesture that was starting to feel like a nervous tic. I can't believe you're being so cruel about this, she whispered. I thought family meant something to you. Family does mean something to me, I said. That's why I used my parents' life insurance, the last thing they ever gave me, to buy a house where I could build a life and maybe, someday, have a family of my own. But apparently, that family I was planning to build includes being homeless for an indeterminate amount of time while my wife's sister treats my property like an Airbnb. I looked directly at Lydia. Tell me how that's supposed to work exactly. 2 days later, I came home from work already mentally exhausted from back-to-back meetings and a presentation that had gone way longer than it should have. All I wanted was to walk through my front door, kick off my shoes, collapse on the couch, and maybe order some Chinese food while watching whatever mindless garbage was on TV. Simple pleasures, you know? The kind of basic human comfort that everyone deserves after a long day. But apparently, the universe had other plans for me, and those plans involved teaching me exactly how low people could sink when they really put their minds to it. I walked up to my front door, fishing my keys out of my pocket like I'd done 1,000 times before, and slid the key into the lock. Except it didn't slide. It didn't turn. It didn't do anything except sit there, useless and mocking, refusing to grant me entry into my own damn house. For a solid 10 seconds, I just stood there, jiggling the key and wondering if maybe I'd somehow broken it, or if the lock had frozen, or if I was having a stroke and had forgotten how keys worked. Then reality hit me like a freight train made of audacity and spite. They'd changed the locks. My wife had actually changed the locks on my own house while I was at work, like I was some kind of tenant who'd stopped paying rent instead of the guy whose name was on the property deed. I tried the key again, just to make absolutely sure I wasn't losing my mind. But nope, same result. The key that had worked perfectly fine that morning was now about as useful as a chocolate teapot. For a second, I genuinely thought maybe I'd gone to the wrong house. I actually looked around, checking the address numbers and the mailbox, making sure this was really my place. Yep, same house number. Same ugly garden gnome that Lydia had insisted we needed for curb appeal, even though it looked like something out of a nightmare. Same driveway with the crack in the concrete that I kept meaning to fix. This was definitely my house. I just apparently wasn't allowed inside it anymore. That's when I saw movement in the front window, and my blood pressure spiked so fast I'm surprised I didn't have an aneurysm right there on my own porch. It was Carla, standing there behind the curtain, and I swear to God she was smirking. Not a subtle little smile, but a full-on Disney villain smirk, the kind that said, "I've won and you've lost, and there's nothing you can do about it." She looked like Scar from The Lion King right after he pushed Mufasa off the cliff, absolutely radiating smug satisfaction. I walked closer to the window, my briefcase still in my hand, trying to process what I was seeing. Carla didn't even have the decency to look ashamed or uncomfortable. She just stood there, one hand on her belly like she was cradling the Holy Grail itself, watching me with this expression that can only be described as triumphant. "You can't throw out a pregnant woman," she yelled through the glass, her voice muffled but still plenty audible. The audacity of that statement almost made me laugh. Almost. I was too busy being absolutely furious to appreciate the irony. "You mean from MY House?" I yelled back, gesturing broadly at the structure around us. "The house I bought. The house with my name on the deed? That house. Because last time I checked, you can't throw someone out of a house they don't live in, and you definitely can't change the locks on someone else's property." But Carla just smiled wider and slammed the window shut, disappearing behind the curtains like some kind of villain retreating to her lair after delivering a dramatic monologue. I stood there on my own front porch, briefcase in one hand, useless keys in the other, staring at my closed and locked front door, and thought about how absolutely surreal my life had become. This wasn't just crossing a line. This was taking a running leap over the line, doing a backflip, and landing in a completely different zip code where apparently laws and common decency didn't exist. I walked back to my car in a daze, my brain trying to catch up with what had just happened. They'd actually done it. They'd actually changed the locks and locked me out of my own house. Not asked me to leave. Not waited for me to find another place. Just straight up changed the locks while I was at work, like I was some kind of squatter instead of the homeowner. I sat in my car in my own driveway, staring at my own front door that I could no longer open, and had what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. Was this real life? Had I somehow stumbled into an alternate dimension? Was I being punked by some elaborate hidden camera show? I looked around for camera crews, but found nothing except my neighbor Mrs. Henderson peeking through her curtains, probably wondering why I was sitting in my car instead of going inside my house like a normal person. The worst part wasn't even being locked out. The worst part was the sheer boldness of it all. Lydia hadn't even warned me. No text, no phone call, no, "Hey honey, just a heads up, we're changing the locks today because we're insane." Just boom. Come home from work to find yourself homeless. It was like being fired, except instead of losing your job, you lost your house. And instead of getting a severance package, you got a sister-in-law smirking at you through your own window. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly from a mixture of rage and disbelief, and stared at the screen for a solid minute before I decided what to do. I could call Lydia and scream at her, which would probably feel good in the moment, but wouldn't actually solve anything. I could try to break into my own house, which seemed insane but was technically legal since I owned it. Or I could do what any rational person would do when they've been illegally locked out of their own property. Call the cops. So I sat there in my car, in my driveway, looking at my house that I bought with my dead parents' insurance money, my house that I'd spent 3 years maintaining and improving and paying for, and thought about how I'd really married the landlord of hell. Lydia wasn't just kicking me out. She was staging a hostile takeover with her pregnant sister as the figurehead and her parents as the board of directors. It was corporate warfare, except the corporation was my marriage and the hostile takeover was my living room. I dialed 911, and when the operator answered, I took a deep breath and said the most surreal sentence I'd ever spoken. Hi. Yes, I need to report that I've been locked out of my own house. By my wife and her pregnant sister. Yes, I'll hold. Welcome to rock bottom, population me. The police showed up about 20 minutes later, which felt like an eternity when you're sitting in your car staring at your own front door like it's some kind of abstract art piece you're trying to understand. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car, a tall guy who looked like he'd seen everything and a younger woman who was already pulling out a notepad like she knew this was going to be a story worth documenting. I got out of my car and met them on the sidewalk, trying to look as sane and reasonable as possible, which is harder than you'd think when you're explaining that your wife locked you out of your own house. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, the tall officer said, his hand resting on his belt in that casual cop way that somehow manages to be both relaxed and authoritative at the same time. This is your house. Your name is on the deed. Yes, sir, I said, pulling out my phone to show him photos of the property deed I'd wisely taken pictures of after the whole family meeting debacle. Bought and paid for with my money. I can show you the mortgage statements, the property tax bills, my driver's license with this address. Whatever you need to verify that I actually live here and haven't just wandered up to some random house claiming it's mine. The officer looked at the documents, then at the house, then back at me with an expression that somehow conveyed both sympathy and exhaustion. And your wife is inside right now? With her sister? Her pregnant sister. I clarified, because apparently that detail mattered to everyone involved in this circus. Who has her own house, by the way, with her own husband, but decided my house was better, I guess. Better feng shui, or whatever. The female officer made a note on her pad, and I saw the corner of her mouth twitch like she was trying not to smile. Sir, she said, looking up at me, we see this kind of thing every week. Family drama with a real estate twist. It's like a really depressing episode of House Hunters. House Hunters, Hostile Takeover Edition, I said, and this time she did smile, just a little. It was nice to know that at least someone found humor in my nightmare. The tall officer, his name tag said Morrison, walked up to my front door and knocked with that authoritative cop knock that sounds different from a regular knock. It's got weight to it, the kind that says, we're not leaving until you open this door. I stood behind him, still holding my briefcase like a security blanket, watching my own front door and wondering what fresh hell was about to unfold. Lydia opened the door, and I watched her face go through an entire journey of emotions in about 2 seconds flat. Surprise, then recognition, then this calculated transformation into the most delicate, fragile flower you've ever seen. Her whole demeanor changed, shoulders slumped, voice going soft and worried, eyes getting all wide and innocent. If there were Olympic medals for sudden personality changes, she would have taken gold. Officers, she said breathlessly, one hand flying to her chest like she was clutching pearls she wasn't wearing. Please, you have to understand. He's stressing out my pregnant sister. She's in a very delicate condition, and we just need some peace and quiet. The doctor said stress isn't good for the baby. I rolled my eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't fall out of my head and roll down the driveway. Of course she was playing the stressed pregnant sister card. Of course that was the angle. Because nothing says, we're the victims here, quite like locking the homeowner out of his own property. Officer Morrison's expression didn't change at all. He'd clearly seen this exact performance before, probably multiple times. Ma'am, he said in a tone that was professional but had zero patience in it. Do you live at this residence? Well, yes, Lydia said, confused about where this was going. I'm his wife. We live here together. And is your name on the property deed? Lydia's face did that thing where you can literally see someone realize they've made a terrible miscalculation. No, but, ma'am, you're illegally occupying his property, Officer Morrison said, cutting through her excuses like a hot knife through butter. You can't lock the legal owner out of his own house. That's not how property law works, even if you're married to him. The female officer, Officer Chun, according to her name tag, stepped forward. You have two options here, ma'am. You can open the door voluntarily and let him in, or we can charge you with illegal lockout and trespassing. Your choice, but I'd recommend option 1. I stood there sipping my coffee that I'd grabbed from my car's cup holder, watching this unfold like it was the season finale of my favorite legal drama. This was better than anything on TV. This was justice in real time, and it tasted like cheap gas station coffee and vindication. From somewhere inside the house, I heard Carla wail like someone had just told her Christmas was canceled. "This is discrimination," she shrieked, her voice carrying through the open door. "You can't do this to a pregnant woman. I have rights." Officer Chen raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, you have the right to stay in your own home, which, according to these documents, is not this one. What you don't have is the right to illegally occupy someone else's property and change the locks. But my sister needs me." Carla appeared in the doorway now, full dramatic mode engaged, both hands on her belly, like she was protecting the baby from the evil police who were apparently persecuting pregnant women for sport. "The baby needs a calm environment. You're going to cause me to go into early labor. You're 6 months pregnant," I pointed out, because I couldn't help myself. "That's not how early labor works. Also, you know what's calm? Your own house. The one you have, with your husband in it." Morrison turned to me with an expression that clearly said, "Please let us handle this," but I could see the hint of amusement in his eyes. He turned back to Lydia. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you going to let the property owner into his own house, or are we going to have a problem here?" Lydia looked at Carla. Carla looked at Lydia. They seemed to be having some kind of silent sister communication, probably telepathically discussing their options, which were rapidly dwindling. Finally, Lydia's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine," she spat out, glaring at me like I was the villain in this story. "Fine, but this isn't over." "Oh, I'm pretty sure it is," I said cheerfully, stepping forward as she moved aside. "But hey, thanks for keeping the place warm for me. Really appreciate it." Officer Morrison handed me a card. "Sir, I'd recommend changing those locks back as soon as possible, and maybe consider having a serious conversation about your living arrangements." "Way ahead of you, officer," I said, pocketing the card. "And by serious conversation, I'm assuming you mean call a lawyer, right?" He just smiled and tipped his hat. "Have a good evening, sir. Try to keep it peaceful." As the officers walked back to their car, I stood in the doorway of my own house. Finally, blessedly, legally in my own house, and watched Lydia and Carla storm around collecting their things with the fury of two people who'd just realized they'd severely miscalculated. Carla was muttering under her breath about police brutality and discrimination, while Lydia was slamming drawers and throwing clothes into a suitcase like she was starring in a very angry montage. "You'll regret this," Lydia hissed as she dragged her suitcase past me. I leaned against the doorframe, coffee still in hand, feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. "Oh, I'm sure I will," I said. "Probably right around the time when my electric bill drops by 50% and I stop finding the refrigerator mysteriously empty every other day." They left in a fury of slammed doors and squealing tires, and I stood there in my quiet, peaceful, legally mine house and smiled. It was a good day to be right. They finally left, and let me tell you, watching them pack up and storm out of my house was more satisfying than any promotion, any raise, any achievement I'd ever earned in my entire professional life. Lydia was throwing stuff into suitcases like she was trying to set a world record for aggressive packing, her face red and furious, muttering things under her breath that I'm pretty sure would have made a sailor blush. Carla was doing her wounded gazelle routine, limping around like the victim of some great injustice, clutching her belly and sighing dramatically every 30 seconds in case anyone forgot she was pregnant for even a moment. The whole production took about 45 minutes, which felt like watching the world's angriest, slowest-moving tornado tear through my house. They grabbed clothes, toiletries, Carla's weird collection of essential oils that apparently were supposed to promote positive energy, but seemed to mostly just make everything smell like a candle store had exploded, and about 17 different throw pillows that Lydia had insisted we needed for the couch. I stood there leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching the whole show with what I can only imagine was the most infuriating smile plastered across my face. Every time Lydia walked past me with another armload of stuff, she'd shoot me a look that could have melted steel. Pure, concentrated hatred mixed with disbelief that I'd actually had the audacity to call the police on my own wife and her precious pregnant sister. How dare I enforce my legal rights to my own property? How dare I refuse to be homeless? The absolute nerve of me, right? At one point, as she was struggling with a particularly overstuffed suitcase, Lydia stopped right in front of me and hissed, "You'll regret this. Mark my words. You're going to wake up one day and realize what a huge mistake you've made, and by then it'll be too late." I took a long, deliberate sip of the coffee I'd been nursing this whole time. It was cold by now, but I didn't care because it was a prop and I was committed to the bit, and smiled even wider. "Oh, I'm absolutely sure I will," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm so thick you could have spread it on toast. "I'm sure I'll regret having my own space back. I'm sure I'll regret being able to control my own thermostat without a committee vote. I'm sure I'll really miss the days when my electric bill was through the roof because someone kept running the air conditioning at 62 degrees while simultaneously opening all the windows for fresh air. Those were the days, truly." Lydia's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. "You've changed," she said, like it was an accusation. "You're not the man I married. You're cold. You're heartless. You're selfish." "No," I corrected her, still maintaining that infuriating smile that I knew was driving her absolutely insane. "I'm warm. Actually, for the first time in weeks, I'm going to be perfectly comfortable because I can finally adjust my thermostat without someone telling me that the baby needs a specific temperature range that apparently only exists in a narrow band between Arctic tundra and surface of the sun. I'm going to be so warm and so comfortable in my own house that I own and pay for." Carla emerged from the guest room then, dragging a bag behind her and looking like she'd just survived a natural disaster instead of being politely asked to leave someone else's property by uniformed police officers. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she whimpered, her voice all breathy and wounded. "I'm pregnant. I'm vulnerable. I needed help, and you just threw me out onto the street like garbage." "Threw you out onto the street?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're going back to your own house. The one you have. The one with your husband in it, and presumably furniture and electricity and all the amenities of modern living. You're not being thrown onto the street. You're being asked to return to your own property. There's a difference, and I know you know what that difference is because you're not actually stupid, just incredibly entitled." She gasped like I'd slapped her, which was her go-to move when someone called her out on her nonsense. Dean appeared behind her, carrying the last of their bags and looking like a man who just wanted this entire ordeal to be over so he could go home and pretend it never happened. Smart man, Dean. He'd barely said a word this entire time. Probably because he'd figured out early on that there was no winning in this situation and the best strategy was to keep his head down and his mouth shut. "Let's go," he said quietly to Carla, putting a hand on her shoulder. "We should get home." "Home," Carla repeated bitterly, shooting me one last venomous look. "To our tiny, inadequate house that doesn't have enough space for a baby." "Your house is 1,500 square feet," I pointed out, because I'd been to their place and it was perfectly nice. "People raise entire families in apartments smaller than your house. You'll be fine. The baby will be fine. Everyone will be fine. And you'll all be fine in your own space instead of trying to colonize mine." They finally made their way to the front door, loaded down with luggage and attitude and shattered dreams of commandeering my property. Lydia paused in the doorway, turning back to look at me one last time with tears in her eyes. Real ones, I think, which almost made me feel bad until I remembered that she'd literally changed the locks on my own house while I was at work. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice cracking. "I hope this house was worth destroying our marriage over." And you know what? I almost laughed. Almost. Because the sheer audacity of that statement, the implication that I was the one who destroyed our marriage by refusing to be made homeless, was so perfectly, beautifully absurd that it deserved its own standing ovation. But I didn't laugh. Instead, I just looked at her, really looked at her, and said the most honest thing I'd said in weeks. "I didn't destroy our marriage by wanting to live in my own house, Lydia. You damaged it by deciding your sister's temporary comfort was more important than your husband's basic rights. But hey, Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe marriage is supposed to be about one person giving up everything while the other person takes whatever they want. I must have missed that part in the vows. She didn't have a response to that. She just turned and walked out, Carla wobbling dramatically behind her, Dean bringing up the rear with a mumbled sorry, man, that I almost didn't catch. I watched them load everything into Carla's SUV, watched them pull out of my driveway, watched the taillights disappear down the street, and then I closed the door. My door. To my house. That I could lock with my own keys that actually worked because I hadn't changed the locks on myself like some kind of bizarre property rights self-sabotage. The silence that followed was absolutely incredible. Not just quiet, but peaceful. The kind of peace you only notice when chaos finally stops. I stood in my entryway for a solid minute, just listening to the nothing, appreciating the absence of dramatic sighs and pregnancy complaints and passive-aggressive comments about how I was failing as a husband and brother-in-law. Then I walked into my kitchen that I wouldn't have to share with people who didn't pay rent or contribute to groceries, and made myself dinner. Not fancy dinner, just simple dinner. I threw together some pasta with Jarrett sauce, the kind of basic meal that bachelors everywhere have been perfecting for generations. I didn't have to ask if anyone else wanted some. I didn't have to accommodate dietary restrictions or pregnancy cravings or listen to commentary about how store-bought sauce wasn't as good as homemade. I just cooked my pasta, dumped on my sauce, and sat down at my table to eat in blissful, beautiful silence. After dinner, I grabbed a beer from the fridge, a beer that I knew would still be there tomorrow because no one else was going to drink it, and settled onto my couch to watch whatever I wanted on TV. I found some mindless action movie with lots of explosions and zero emotional depth, the kind of movie that Lydia always complained about, and I watched the entire thing without anyone sighing dramatically or asking if we could watch something else or commenting on how unrealistic the physics were. At one point, I actually talked to my couch. Out loud. I said, "You know what, couch? You're a pretty good couch. I'm glad I bought you. I'm glad you're here." And the couch didn't judge me or tell me I was being weird or suggest that maybe we needed to replace it with something more pregnancy-friendly or whatever insane criteria had apparently become important in my life recently. The couch just existed, solid and supportive, exactly as a couch should be. That night, I slept in my own bed in my own room in my own house, sprawled out in the middle without anyone complaining that I was taking up too much space or that my breathing was too loud or that the room temperature wasn't optimal for fetal development. I slept like the dead, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that only comes when your stress levels finally drop from actively being evicted from your own home to actually living in peace in said home. Freedom, I discovered, smelled like leftover pizza and tasted like justice. And it was absolutely glorious. 3 days passed. 3 glorious, peaceful, drama-free days where I lived in my house like a normal human being instead of a refugee in my own home. I went to work, came back, made dinner, watched TV, and did all the normal things that people do when they're not being actively evicted by their in-laws. It was mundane. It was boring. It was absolutely perfect. I'd even started sleeping through the night again, without waking up in a cold sweat wondering if I'd find a "you must vacate" notice taped to my bedroom door. On the 4th day, my phone rang while I was making breakfast. Just simple scrambled eggs and toast. Nothing fancy. But I was actually enjoying the process because nobody was hovering over my shoulder telling me I was using too much butter or that the toast was too dark or that the eggs needed to be cooked a specific way for optimal nutrition. I looked at the screen and saw Lydia's name, and I'll admit, my first instinct was to decline the call and go about my peaceful morning. But curiosity got the better of me. What could she possibly have to say now? Was she calling to apologize? To admit she'd been completely insane? To beg for forgiveness? Spoiler alert, it was none of those things. I answered the phone and put it on speaker, keeping my hands free so I could continue cooking. "Hello. You humiliated my sister." Lydia's voice came through, tight and angry, no greeting or preamble. Straight to the accusation. "She was crying for hours after you kicked us out. Hours. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. You traumatized a pregnant woman." I flipped my eggs, watching them sizzle in the pan, and took a deep breath before responding. "Was she crying before or after the police explained that you can't illegally occupy someone else's property and change the locks?" Because I feel like that's an important timeline distinction here. Also, I didn't kick you out, the law did. I just happened to be the guy who owned the house you were trying to steal. We weren't trying to steal anything. Lydia snapped, and I could practically see her face getting red through the phone. We were trying to help family. We were trying to provide a safe space for my sister during a vulnerable time. But apparently, you care more about property rights than you do about human beings. Oh, we're doing the guilt trip thing, I said, sliding my eggs onto a plate. Cool, cool. Let me just grab my scorecard here. So far today, I'm apparently a heartless monster who values property over people. Yesterday, according to your mom's text that I ignored, I was a selfish husband who doesn't understand family values. The day before that, your dad called me. Yeah, that happened, and said I was prioritizing materialism over relationships. It's like you guys have a whole PR campaign going, and I'm the villain in all your group chats. This isn't a joke, Lydia said, her voice rising. Carla is genuinely distressed. The doctor said stress isn't good for the baby, and you've caused her nothing but stress since this whole thing started. I sat down at my kitchen table with my breakfast and my coffee, getting comfortable because I could tell this was going to be a long conversation. Let me ask you something, I said, cutting into my eggs. When exactly did I become responsible for Carla's stress levels? Was there a ceremony I missed? Did I sign a contract? Because from where I'm sitting, Carla's stress is coming from the fact that she tried to take over my house, got told no by law enforcement, and now has to live in her own perfectly adequate house with her own husband. That's not stress I created. That's consequences she earned. You've changed, Lydia said, and there was something in her voice now, something that sounded almost like sadness mixed with disbelief. The man I married would never have called the police on his own family. He would never have been this cold and calculating. What happened to you? I set down my fork and stared at my phone sitting on the table, speaker mode making Lydia's voice fill my quiet kitchen. What happened to me? I repeated slowly. I'll tell you what happened to me. I worked my ass off for 6 months to get a promotion. I came home thinking we'd celebrate together, like partners, like a team. Instead, I walked into an ambush where my wife and her entire family told me I needed to leave my own house. Then, when I refused to voluntarily become homeless, you changed the locks while I was at work. So yeah, maybe I have changed. Maybe getting kicked out of your own home by the people who are supposed to love you will do that to a person. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and I almost thought she'd hung up. Then she spoke again, quieter now. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd want to help. I did want to help, I said, picking up my coffee mug. I still want to help. But there's a difference between helping and being a doormat. You want me to help? Great. I can bring meals. I can babysit. I can be supportive in about 1,000 different ways that don't involve me giving up my home. But that's not what you wanted, was it? You didn't want help. You wanted complete surrender. That's not fair, Lydia protested. Isn't it? I challenged. You didn't ask me to help Carla. You told me to move out. You didn't suggest ways we could support her together. You tried to evict me. There's no universe where that's reasonable, Lydia. None. Another pause, and then she hit me with what she'd probably been building up to this whole time. My parents think you should apologize. I actually laughed out loud. Couldn't help it. The sound just burst out of me like a balloon popping. Your parents think I should apologize, I repeated, still chuckling. That's amazing. That's truly spectacular. Let me guess. They think I should apologize for enforcing my legal rights to my own property? Or maybe for not rolling over and playing dead when you all decided to stage a hostile takeover of my house. They think you should apologize for how you handled it. Lydia clarified, like that made it better. For being so aggressive about it. For calling the police instead of working it out like adults. Working it out like adults, I said, my laughter dying down. You mean like how I tried to have multiple conversations about this and got shut down every time? Like how I explained, repeatedly, that this was my house and I wasn't leaving. Like how I showed you the property deed with my name on it. I tried the adult conversation route, Lydia. You responded by changing the locks. You could have just given us the space we needed, she said, and there was that entitled tone creeping back in. It wouldn't have been forever. Just a few months. A few months, I repeated flatly. And where was I supposed to live during these few months? Did anyone even think about that? Did it occur to anyone that maybe, just maybe, the person who owns the house should get to stay in the house? You could have stayed with your brother, Lydia said, like she'd really thought this through. Or gotten an apartment. You just got a promotion. You can afford it. I set down my coffee mug harder than I intended, and it made a sharp sound against the table. Here's a radical thought. Maybe Carla could use her money to make her own house work for her instead of taking mine. Maybe Dean could rearrange his home office. Maybe they could buy a crib and some baby supplies and turn one of their rooms into a nursery like literally millions of people do every single year. But no, that would require them to be responsible for their own situation instead of making it everyone else's problem. She's my sister, Lydia said, and her voice cracked a little. She needed help. And I'm your husband, I shot back. Or at least I was. I'm not sure what I am now. Maybe I'm just the guy who owns the house you wanted to give away to your sister. The silence stretched out between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I could hear her breathing on the other end, could almost picture her standing wherever she was, phone pressed to her ear, trying to figure out what to say next. Part of me, a small, stupid part, wanted to take it all back, to say we could figure this out, to find some compromise that would make everyone happy. But I knew there was no compromise here. There was only me giving in completely or standing my ground. My parents think you should let Carla stay until she gives birth, Lydia finally said, and I could tell from her tone that she knew this wasn't going to go well, but was saying it anyway. Just until the baby comes. Then she'll leave, I promise. We'll all leave. We just need a little more time. I looked around my kitchen in my house that I'd bought with the last thing my parents ever gave me, and I thought about how easy it would be to just say yes. How simple it would be to avoid the conflict, to be the good guy, to make everyone happy except myself. I thought about packing a bag and finding some furnished apartment or imposing on my brother, sleeping on couches and eating takeout, while my house got turned into a nursery for someone else's kid. I thought about coming back in a few months, or 6 months, or a year, because we all knew, until the baby comes, would somehow turn into, until the baby is older, to find my office converted, my stuff moved, my space violated. And then I thought about my parents, and how they'd worked their entire lives to leave me something, and how they'd never in a million years have expected that I'd give it all away because my wife's sister got pregnant. Tell your parents, I said, my voice perfectly calm and level, that I'll send flowers to the hospital when the baby's born. From my house, the one I'm living in, the one I'm going to keep living in because it's mine. You're being unreasonable, Lydia said, but her voice had lost its edge. She sounded tired now, defeated. No, I corrected her. I'm being clear. There's a difference. I'm done being wishy-washy about this. I'm done entertaining the idea that me living in my own house is somehow negotiable. This is where I stand, and I'm not moving, literally or figuratively. So that's it. Lydia asked, "You're just going to throw away our marriage over this?" "I'm not throwing away anything," I said. "I'm keeping what's mine." If you can't understand the difference, then maybe we need to have a bigger conversation about what marriage means. Because from where I'm sitting, marriage should be about supporting each other, not demanding that one person sacrifice everything for the other person's family. "I can't believe you're being this way," she said quietly. "And I can't believe you changed the locks on my house," I replied. So I guess we're both surprised by each other's behavior. Difference is, mine is legal. There was a long pause, and then Lydia said, "I need to go," and hung up before I could respond. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at my phone screen that had gone dark, my eggs getting cold on my plate. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt bad about being so harsh with her. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of defending my right to live in my own house. Tired of being treated like the villain for not volunteering to be homeless. I picked up my fork and finished my breakfast, even though it was cold now and didn't taste as good. Then I cleaned up my dishes, got ready for work, and went about my day. Because that's what you do when you're an adult living in your own home. You eat breakfast, you clean up after yourself, and you go to work. And you definitely, absolutely, do not apologize for refusing to give away your house to your pregnant sister-in-law. That evening, I sat on my couch with a beer in my phone, and I finally texted back, "I'm not apologizing. Not now, not ever. Hope Carla feels better soon. Hope the baby is healthy. Hope you all find peace in your own homes." I hit send and blocked the number. It was time to start healing, and I couldn't do that while being bombarded with guilt trips and manipulation. Months passed. Not the kind of time that drags on forever when you're miserable, but the good kind that just flows naturally when your life isn't a constant dumpster fire of family drama and property disputes. Fall turned into winter. The leaves changed colors and fell off the trees, and I settled into a routine that was so blissfully normal it almost felt rebellious. Wake up, make coffee in my own kitchen without anyone critiquing my brewing method, go to work, come home to a house that was exactly how I left it, repeat. Revolutionary stuff, really. Living like a functional adult in your own home. Someone should write a book about it. I found out through the grapevine. Okay, through my brother who heard it from his wife, who somehow still kept in touch with Lydia's cousin. That Carla had given birth to a baby girl. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy and screaming. All the usual baby stuff. My phone had been blissfully quiet since I'd blocked Lydia's number, so I didn't get a direct announcement. But honestly, I was fine with that. I did what any reasonable person would do. I ordered flowers online, had them sent to the hospital with a card that said congratulations on the new arrival, and went about my day. Professional, polite, completely devoid of guilt or obligation. About a week after the birth, I got a text from Lydia's mom Martha on a number I hadn't blocked yet. She must have gotten clever and used a different phone. The message was short and dripping with passive-aggressive disappointment. You missed the baby shower. I stared at that text for a solid minute, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, considering all the ways I could respond. I could ignore it. I could block this number too. I could write a lengthy explanation about how being excluded from your own home tends to make you less enthusiastic about family events. But instead, I went with something simple and to the point. Oh no. I typed back, my fingers practically dancing across the screen. Did I miss another meeting about how to redecorate my living room? Was there a vote on whether I should be allowed to use my own bathroom? Please, fill me in on all the important decisions that were made about my property in my absence. I didn't wait for a response. I just blocked that number too and added it to the growing list of people who think I should feel guilty for living in my own house. The list was getting pretty long, actually. It included Lydia's parents, her Aunt Susan who I'd met exactly twice, some cousin whose name I couldn't even remember, and apparently several people from Lydia's book club who felt the need to weigh in on my personal life despite never having actually met me. But here's the thing, I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little bit. I'd spent enough time in therapy by this point. Yeah, I'd started going to therapy, best decision I'd made in years, to understand that what had happened wasn't normal or reasonable or something I should feel bad about. My therapist, Dr. Patterson, had this way of cutting through nonsense that I really appreciated. During one session, I'd been rambling about whether I'd been too harsh, and she'd just looked at me over her glasses and said, "Did you kick them out of their own home, or did you refuse to be kicked out of yours?" Point made. Argument 1. Guilt dissolved. I was sleeping well for the first time in what felt like forever. Not just okay sleep, but deep, restful, wake-up actually refreshed sleep. The kind of sleep you get when you're not constantly worried about coming home to find your locks changed, or your office converted into a nursery, or your wife's entire family staging another intervention in your living room. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be relaxed in my own space, to walk through my front door and just feel peaceful instead of anxious. Work was going great too. That promotion I'd killed myself to get? Turns out I was actually pretty good at the job when I wasn't constantly distracted by family drama and eviction attempts. My boss had mentioned the possibility of another raise, and I was actually considering it instead of immediately thinking about how the extra money would probably just get absorbed into someone else's needs and wants. Funny how much clearer you can think when you're not being gaslit about property ownership. I'd started making plans for the house too. Real plans, the kind you make when you know you're actually going to be living somewhere long-term. I was going to redo the basement, turn it into a proper entertainment space with a big TV and comfortable furniture, maybe a bar area. I was going to fix that crack in the driveway that I'd been putting off. I was even considering adopting a dog, something I'd always wanted but Lydia had vetoed because dogs are too much work, and the house will smell, and various other excuses that really just meant I don't want one. The guest room, the one that Carla had briefly occupied like some kind of entitled squatter, I converted into a home gym. Nothing fancy, just some weights, a yoga mat, a pull-up bar. But it was mine, and I used it, and nobody complained about the noise or suggested that maybe the space would be better used for someone else's purposes. Revolutionary concept. Using rooms in your own house for things you actually want. I'd also started renting out my spare bedroom. The one that Lydia and Carla had wanted to turn into a nursery without my permission. I put up an ad online for a roommate, interviewed a few people, and settled on Marcus, a grad student who was quiet, clean, paid rent on time, and had no pregnant relatives who felt entitled to take over the house. He worked odd hours doing research at the university, so we barely saw each other, which was perfect. He paid me actual money to live in a room in my house, which was a novel concept after dealing with people who wanted to live there for free while also kicking me out. Sometimes I'd be sitting on my couch, watching whatever I wanted on TV, eating pizza straight from the box because I was an adult and I could, and I'd just laugh at the absurdity of it all. My wife had tried to evict me from my own house for her pregnant sister. That was a real thing that had actually happened in my life. It wasn't a sitcom plot or a Reddit horror story. It was my actual lived experience. And somehow, I'd survived it. More than survived it, actually. I'd come out the other side with my house, my sanity, and my self-respect intact. The holidays came and went. I spent Thanksgiving with my brother and his family, ate too much turkey, watched football, and had exactly zero conversations about property rights or pregnancy accommodations. It was glorious. Christmas was quiet. Just me and Marcus and a badly decorated tree that leaned slightly to the left because I'd never been good at the whole tree stand thing. We ordered Chinese food and watched Die Hard, debating whether it counted as a Christmas movie. It does, obviously, and anyone who says otherwise is wrong. I got a few texts around the holidays from numbers I didn't recognize, clearly Lydia's family using different phones to get around my blocks. They all had the same basic theme. Family should be together during the holidays, and can't you forgive and move on? And my personal favorite, the baby's first Christmas, and her uncle isn't even there. Uncle. They were calling me uncle, as if I had some kind of obligation to a child whose mother had tried to steal my house. I deleted the messages without responding and went back to my Chinese food and my movie and my peaceful, drama-free holiday. New Year's came, and I made exactly one resolution. Keep the boundaries I'd set. Don't backslide. Don't feel guilty for protecting what was mine. Don't let anyone convince me that standing up for myself was somehow wrong or cruel or selfish. It was a simple resolution, but it felt important. Revolutionary, even, in a world that seemed to expect people, especially men, especially husbands, to just roll over and accept whatever their families demanded. One evening in January, I was walking through my house, doing a final check before bed, making sure the doors were locked, turning off lights, the usual routine, and I found myself chuckling. Just standing there in my hallway, shaking my head and laughing at the sheer ridiculousness of everything that had happened. My wife had tried to evict me for her sister. From the home I bought with my parents' life insurance. The last tangible thing they'd left me, and someone had tried to take it away because a baby supposedly needed better vibes. Life DX6XM in my house. Some people only app read. Our PU0 puff hushiated your roof until they were standing outside in the rain, realizing they'd given up shelter for the sake of entitled relatives and impossible demands. Some people needed to lose something before they understood its value. But me? I'd learned my lesson early. I'd learned that peace worth fighting for, that boundaries were worth maintaining, and that sometimes the most you could do was refuse to let people walk all over you. I'd learned that owning property meant more than just having your name on a deed. It meant having the backbone to defend what was yours when people tried to take it. I'd learned that family was important, sure, but so was self-respect. And when forced to choose between the two, I'd choose myself every single time. Loving Guyulithing. As I drifted off to sleep that night, comfortable and warm in my own bed in my own house, I smiled. Tomorrow, Marcus would pay rent on time like he always did. Tomorrow, I'd go to work and home to a space that was mine. Tomorrow, I'd live my life on my terms, in my house, with my rules. And if anyone had a problem with that, well, they knew where the door was. I'd even help them find it if they asked nicely. Peace, I discovered, was best served with sarcasm and a sturdy deadbolt. And maybe some leftover pizza. Life was good. I came home with a woman. My wife yelled, "Who is she? What's going on?" We walked in silently and smiled. "Meet the wife of your boss and your lover," I said. My wife froze. You ever notice how marriages don't end with fireworks? They don't go out in some blaze of glory with thrown dishes and screaming matches that the neighbors call the cops about. Nah, that's Hollywood garbage. Real marriages die like houseplants nobody remembers to water, slow, quiet, and with just enough guilt to make you feel like crap when you finally notice the brown leaves. Mine started its death spiral in the kitchen on a Tuesday, which feels about right because Tuesdays are the emotional equivalent of gas station sushi. Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. She was doing dishes, which sounds domestic and sweet until you realize she was scrubbing the same plate for about 5 minutes like she was trying to erase evidence of a crime. I walked up behind her, reached out to touch her shoulder. You know, that casual thing you do when you've been married long enough that words feel optional. And she flinched. Not like a little twitch, but a full-body recoil like I'd just tried to hand her a live grenade. She pulled away so fast you'd think I was radioactive, like my touch came with a Surgeon General's warning and a list of side effects that included nausea, regret, and the sudden urge to fake your own death. Not in the mood, she said, her voice flat as Kansas and about twice as boring. Again, that word hung in the air between us like a fart nobody wants to acknowledge, but everyone can smell. Not in the mood. The universal get-out-of-intimacy-free card that women have been playing since the invention of marriage itself. I should have printed it on a t-shirt and worn it around the house just to save her the trouble of saying it every damn day. No fight, no tears, no passionate argument about feelings or needs or any of that therapy talk nonsense that Dr. Phil gets paid millions to spew. Just cold air, colder silence, and a dish towel she folded with the kind of precision usually reserved for origami masters or people trying really hard not to make eye contact. She worked that towel like it was a Rubik's Cube, and if she got it just right, she'd unlock the secret level where she didn't have to acknowledge my existence. I stood there watching her, and I swear to God, I had this moment of crystal clear clarity that hits you like a brick to the skull. The kind of realization that makes you wonder if this is what people mean when they talk about enlightenment. Except instead of finding inner peace, you just find out you've been playing yourself for months. I thought, wow, love really does come with a warranty these days, doesn't it? Except mine apparently expired somewhere between I do and I don't give a damn anymore. And nobody bothered to send me the renewal notice. I didn't argue. What's the point? Arguing with someone who's already checked out emotionally is like trying to reason with a brick wall. Except the brick wall has better listening skills and doesn't sigh dramatically every time you open your mouth. So instead, I just stood there like an idiot, hands at my sides, watching my wife treat basic human affection like it was some kind of communicable disease she might catch if she got too close. Right then and there, I wrote myself a mental note, the kind that burns itself into your brain in neon letters you can't ignore even if you tried. Stop reaching for people who treat your touch like a tax. Stop begging for crumbs of affection from someone who acts like giving you basic human decency is equivalent to donating a kidney. Stop playing yourself, Mason, because you're better than this discount bin version of love they sell at the marriage clearance sale. That night, lying in our bed that felt more like a demilitarized zone than a place of intimacy, I stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathe on the other side of our king-sized relationship graveyard. She was facing away from me, of course, because God forbid we accidentally make eye contact in the dark and have to acknowledge that we were two people slowly suffocating under the weight of pretending everything was fine. The space between us felt like the Grand Canyon, except less scenic and more depressing. And that's when it hit me, the plan. Not some dramatic revenge scheme involving burning her clothes or slashing tires or any of that Psycho X nonsense that lands you in jail or on a daytime talk show. Nah, I'm classier than that. More calculated. I started planning my quiet revenge right there in the dark, and let me tell you something. Quiet revenge is the best kind of revenge. It's the aged whiskey of payback, smooth, sophisticated, and it only gets better with time. I wasn't going to yell or cry or beg her to love me like some pathetic rom-com protagonist who thinks grand gestures fix fundamental incompatibility. I wasn't going to chase someone who clearly didn't want to be caught. I was going to do something way more devastating. I was going to stop caring. I was going to reclaim my dignity, my sanity, and my damn self-respect, and I was going to do it so smoothly she wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. See, most people think revenge is about hurting the other person, making them feel the pain you felt, evening some cosmic score like life's a basketball game and you're down by 20 points. But that's amateur hour. Real revenge, the kind that actually means something. is about becoming so completely unbothered, so thoroughly moved on, so absolutely fine without them that their absence becomes irrelevant. It's about reaching a point where they could walk back in your life and you'd feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a mild, "Oh, it's you," like they're the mailman dropping off bills. I rolled over, pulled the blanket up, and smiled in the dark. Not a bitter smile or a sad smile, but a genuine, "I just figured out the cheat code to this video game" kind of smile. Tomorrow, I'd start making moves. Small ones at first, nothing she'd notice right away because she was too busy not noticing me anyway. But they'd add up. They'd compound like interest on a savings account I'd been neglecting for way too long. The flinch before the fire, that's what this was. That moment when you pull your hand back right before you touch the hot stove because your survival instincts kick in and scream, "Abort mission, dumbass." She flinched away from me tonight. Yeah, but I was about to flinch away from this whole dying marriage before it burned me any worse than it already had. And the best part? She had no idea the clock had just started ticking. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from a full night's sleep next to someone who pretends you don't exist. It's liberating in a weird way, like finally admitting to yourself that the restaurant you've been defending for years actually has terrible food, and you've just been lying to yourself because you didn't want to admit you wasted all that time and money. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and decided that today was the day I'd stop playing house with someone who clearly moved out emotionally about 6 months ago, but forgot to tell her body to follow. I made breakfast. Real breakfast, not that grab a granola bar and run garbage we've been doing for months. I'm talking eggs, bacon, toast, the whole production that makes your kitchen smell like someone actually gives a damn about starting the day right. She wandered in around 7:30 wearing that ratty purple robe that had seen better days sometime during the Bush administration, the first one, probably. Her hair was doing that thing where it defied gravity and logic simultaneously, and she had her phone clutched in her hand like it was a life preserver, and she was drowning in a sea of our failed marriage. "Morning," I said, sliding eggs onto a plate with the kind of domestic competence that would make those cooking show hosts weep with pride. I even folded the bacon into a little smile shape because I'm petty like that and wanted to show her what happiness looked like since she clearly forgot. She grunted, actually grunted, like some kind of cave person who just discovered fire and wasn't impressed. She grabbed her coffee, which I'd made, by the way, because I'm a saint, and scrolled through her phone with the intensity of someone either planning world domination or shopping for throw pillows online. With her, it could honestly go either way. "So," I said, sitting down across from her with my own plate, "I was thinking we could do something Friday night. Maybe that Italian place you like? The one with the breadsticks that are basically just butter delivery systems." I was testing the waters, seeing if there was any sign of life in this relationship or if I was basically married to a really expensive roommate who hogged the bathroom. She didn't even look up. "Can't do Friday night. I'm busy," she said, her voice flat as a pancake that someone left on the griddle too long. Busy. That magic word that means absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. Busy with what, exactly? I wanted to ask. Busy folding lies into neat little squares and stacking them in whatever dark corner of your conscience you keep that thing? Busy pretending our marriage isn't circling the drain like hair in a shower that needs cleaning? Busy with what? I asked anyway, because apparently I enjoy pain and redundant conversations. "Groceries," she said, like she'd just dropped some classified government intel, and I should be impressed by her commitment to national security through produce shopping. "Groceries? On a Friday night. At what, 7 p.m.? Who does groceries on Friday night unless they're either lying or have the social life of a lint roller?" I wanted to call her out right there, wanted to say something like, "Really, groceries? That's the best you could come up with?" But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and took a bite of my eggs, which suddenly tasted like disappointment with a side of, what am I doing with my life? That's when I made my second executive decision in less than 24 hours. I stood up, grabbed my plate, and said, "You know what? I'm moving to the guest room." She looked up for the first time all morning, and I could see the little wheels turning in her head trying to figure out if this was a problem or a convenience. "What? What?" "Because sharing a bed with someone who acts like I've got the plague seems kind of pointless, don't you think?" I said it calm, no drama, just stating facts like I was reading the weather report. "Plus, new arrangement starting today. Your bills, my bills, shared list for house stuff." I'm not your wallet with legs anymore. Her face went through about 15 emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise, anger, confusion, and what I think might have been relief, though she'd rather eat glass than admit that. That's so dramatic, Mason, she said, pulling out that word like it was some kind of trump card that automatically won arguments. No, honey, I said, putting my plate in the sink and turning to face her with the kind of smile you give someone when you're done playing their games. Titanic was dramatic. The ship sank, people died. Leo couldn't fit on that door even though there was clearly room. That was dramatic. This. I gestured between us like I was a game show host revealing the grand prize of mutual dysfunction. This is just accounting. This is me finally balancing the books on a relationship that's been operating in the red for way too long. She opened her mouth to say something. Probably something about how I was being unreasonable or difficult or whatever adjective she'd picked up from her weekly brunch crew, who all thought their husbands were the problem too. But I was already walking away, coffee in hand, dignity somewhat intact, heading to the guest room to start my new life as the world's most organized, separated but still technically married man. At work that day, I must have looked different because my buddy Jerry took one look at me in the break room and said, "You look like a man who just signed a peace treaty with his sanity." Jerry's one of those guys who's been divorced twice and somehow came out the other side more well-adjusted than most people who've never been married. He's like a war veteran, but for relationships, and his advice usually involves bourbon and brutal honesty in equal measures. Something like that, I said, pouring myself what had to be my 4th coffee of the day, which probably wasn't healthy, but neither was my marriage, so we were all making questionable choices here. She finally push you over the edge? Jerry asked, leaning against the counter with his own mug that said, "World's okayest employee," because Jerry understood the power of managing expectations. More like I finally realized I was standing on the edge holding her hand while she was trying to figure out how to push me off without getting blamed for it. I said. So I just let go. Jerry nodded slowly, like I'd just shared some profound wisdom instead of just basic self-preservation. That's growth right there, man. Most guys hang on until they're nothing but a shell of themselves, walking around like zombies in their own lives. You're getting out before you need a support group and a prescription. He wasn't wrong. I could feel it already. That lightness that comes from finally making a decision instead of just floating in limbo, hoping things magically fix themselves. Hope is a terrible strategy, by the way. Hope is what you do when you're too scared to actually change anything. So you just wish really hard and pretend that counts as effort. Guest room, separate finances, and I'm done being her emotional punching bag, I said, ticking off my new boundaries like I was reading a grocery list, which felt appropriate given her Friday night plans. Good man, Jerry said, raising his mug in a toast. Welcome to the land of the living. It's pretty nice here. We have standards and self-respect. You're gonna like it. I clinked my mug against his and took a sip of coffee that somehow tasted better than it had 5 minutes ago. Maybe it was the caffeine finally kicking in, or maybe it was just the taste of freedom mixed with French roast. Either way, I was already feeling like a different person than the guy who'd reached for his wife's shoulder last night only to get treated like a biohazard. That night, I set up the guest room properly. My clothes in the closet, my books on the nightstand, my phone charger within reach. It felt like moving into a studio apartment inside my own house, which was depressing and liberating at the same time. She didn't say anything about it, didn't even acknowledge the change, which told me everything I needed to know. I lay there that night in my new bed, staring at a different ceiling, and realized something important. I wasn't sad. I was relieved. And that relief tasted better than any fake reconciliation ever could. Saturday rolled around like it had nowhere better to be, and apparently we had plans I'd completely forgotten about because my brain had been too busy processing the dumpster fire that was my marriage. Tom and Dana's barbecue. The annual summer thing they did where everyone pretended their lives were Instagram perfect while drinking beer that cost more than it should and eating burgers that were somehow always slightly undercooked in the middle. I would have bailed, honestly, but my wife informed me at 10 in the morning that we were going and that I should try to be social for once, which was rich coming from someone who'd been treating me like furniture for the past 6 months. We drove there in silence, which had become our default setting lately. The kind of silence that's so thick you could cut it with a knife, bottle it, and sell it as essence of failed marriage at one of those fancy stores where everything costs too much and smells like lies and lavender. She stared out the window like the passing scenery was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen, and I focused on the road while mentally calculating how long I had to stay before it became socially acceptable to fake a work emergency. Tom and Dana's place was exactly what you'd expect from a couple who made doing brunch their entire personality. Perfectly manicured lawn, string lights that probably cost more than my first car, and a grill that looked like it could double as a spaceship if Tom ever decided to abandon suburban life and explore the cosmos. There were already about 15 people there, all holding drinks and laughing at jokes that probably weren't that funny, but sounded hilarious after 3 beers and the collective agreement to pretend everyone's life was going great. Mason, hey buddy, Tom called out, waving a spatula like he was directing traffic. Tom was one of those guys who wore cargo shorts year-round and thought saying living the dream was a personality trait. Nice enough guy, but about as deep as a kiddie pool. Hey Tom, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. My wife had already disappeared into the house with Dana and 2 other women whose names I could never remember, but who all seemed to share the same haircut and opinion about everything. I grabbed a beer from the cooler, something craft with a label that looked like it was designed by someone who took a lot of mushrooms, and planted myself near the grill where at least I could look occupied. Jerry was there too, because apparently the universe knew I'd need backup, and he gave me a knowing nod that said, "I see you're in hell, hang in there." Everything was fine for about 45 minutes. I made small talk with some guy named Brad or Chad or something equally douchey who worked in finance and wouldn't shut up about his boat. I nodded in the right places, laughed when it seemed appropriate, and generally played the part of normal functioning human at social event. Then my wife came back outside with her little entourage, and I could tell by the look on her face that she was about to do something that would make me regret not faking that work emergency. She was holding a wine glass, her third, if I was counting correctly, which I was, and had that particular smile that women get when they're about to throw someone under a bus, but make it sound like a joke. I've seen that smile before. It never ends well. "So Mason's been going through a bit of a phase lately," she announced to the group, her voice carrying across the patio like she was narrating a nature documentary about an endangered species. Everyone's attention shifted to me like I was suddenly the main attraction at a zoo nobody asked to visit. I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my face neutral. "Oh yeah," I said, taking a sip of my beer and praying for a meteor strike. "Yeah, he's gotten really into self-help stuff," she continued, doing this little laugh that was supposed to sound affectionate, but came out condescending. "Reading all these books about boundaries and self-care and feelings. It's very..." She paused, searching for the word like she was picking out produce. "Emotional. He's become very emotional." A few people chuckled, that uncomfortable laugh people do when they don't know if something's funny or if they're witnessing a murder in slow motion. Jerry looked at me with wide eyes that clearly said, "Abort, abort, abort." But I was already past the point of no return. "He's in a self-help phase," she said again, really driving it home now. Bless his heart. And there it was, bless his heart, the Southern woman's way of saying, what a pathetic loser, while maintaining plausible deniability. She might as well have patted me on the head and given me a participation trophy for trying to have basic human dignity. Something in me just snapped. Not in a dramatic, throw things kind of way, but in a quiet, I'm done with this performance kind of way. I started laughing. Really laughing. The kind of genuine laugh that comes from the absurdity of realizing you've been playing yourself, and everyone just watched it happen in real time. Everyone stared at me like I'd just started speaking in tongues. My wife's smile faltered, probably because this wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She wanted me to shrink, to look embarrassed, to prove her point about me being too emotional or whatever narrative she was selling to justify treating me like garbage. Instead, I stood up, set my beer down on the table with the kind of deliberate care you use when you're about to do something you can't take back, and smiled at Tom and Dana. "Tom, Dana, thanks for the burgers," I said, my voice calm and clear. "They were great. Really great. But my therapist..." "Yeah, I have one of those now, isn't that wild? My therapist says I shouldn't eat where I'm disrespected. Something about digestion and stress. Very scientific." The patio went so quiet you could hear someone's ice cubes melting 3 yards away. Tom looked like he wanted to crawl into his fancy grill and become one with the charcoal. Dana's mouth was literally hanging open, catching flies and regrets. My wife's face went through more colors than a sunset. "Mason, don't be dramatic," she hissed, which was apparently her favorite word lately, like she'd bought it in bulk from some Costco of manipulative phrases. "Dramatic?" I said, turning to look at her with the kind of calm that comes from finally being done with someone's bullshit. "Drama's what happens when you mix boredom with bad manners. I gestured around at the assembled crowd who were all pretending they suddenly found their shoes fascinating. "This is just me having standards. Novel concept, I know." I grabbed my keys from my pocket and started walking toward the gate. Behind me, I could hear my wife saying something about me being ridiculous, about how I was embarrassing her, about how I was making a scene. But here's the thing about being called dramatic by someone who's been staging a one-woman show of emotional manipulation for months. It loses its power real quick. "Mason, wait," she called out, her voice sharp with embarrassment and anger. I turned around one last time, right at the gate, and looked at her standing there on Tom and Dana's perfect patio with her wine glass and her audience, and her carefully constructed image of being the reasonable one in our marriage. "You know what's dramatic?" I said. "Publicly humiliating your husband at a barbecue because you're too much of a coward to just admit you checked out of this marriage months ago. That's dramatic. Me leaving? That's just self-respect. Learn the difference." Then I walked out, leaving her holding a paper plate loaded with potato salad and her pride, both of which were probably going to be hard to swallow. I could hear the murmur of confused voices behind me. People probably asking if I was okay, if we were okay, trying to figure out what just happened and whose side they were supposed to take in whatever divorce announcement just got broadcast at their nice suburban barbecue. I got in my car, started the engine, and sat there for a second, hands on the steering wheel, waiting for the regret to hit me. Waiting for that feeling of, "Oh God, what did I just do?" that usually follows any public confrontation. But it never came. Instead, I felt lighter, like I'd just put down a backpack full of rocks I didn't realize I'd been carrying. My phone buzzed. "Jerry, dude. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. You good?" "Me. Never better." "That's probably a lie, but I'm working on it." "Jerry, beer later?" "Me. Absolutely." I drove home alone, windows down, radio playing some song I didn't know the words to but hummed anyway. And somewhere between Tom and Dana's place and my driveway, I realized something important. I wasn't her background extra anymore. I wasn't the supporting character in her story, the husband prop she could mock for cheap laughs while her friends nodded along. I was the main character in my own life now, and that felt pretty damn good. A few days after the barbecue incident, which had apparently made the rounds in our social circle faster than a celebrity death hoax, I was driving home from work when I saw it. Her car. That silver SUV she'd insisted we needed because apparently sedans were for people without ambition, or whatever the car salesman had convinced her of while I stood there wondering why we were dropping 40 grand on a vehicle that would spend most of its life shuttling one person to Target and back. It was parked outside Catalyst Coffee, this pretentious place downtown where they charged $7 for coffee and acted like they were doing you a favor by serving it in a mug that looked like it was made by someone's nephew in pottery class. Not her usual spot. She was a Starbucks girl through and through, the kind who ordered drinks with so many modifications the baristas probably drew straws to see who had to take her order. So seeing her car there was already weird, like spotting a vegan at a steakhouse or a politician telling the truth. I should have driven past. I should have minded my own business and gone home to my guest room and my new life of peaceful separation. But here's the thing about marriage. Even when it's dying, even when you're pretty sure it's already dead and you're just waiting for someone to call time of death, there's still this sick curiosity that makes you want to know. Like watching a car crash in slow motion. You know it's going to be bad, but you can't look away. I pulled into a spot across the street, far enough away that I wasn't obvious, but close enough to see through the massive windows that hipster coffee shops apparently require by law. And there she was, sitting at one of those reclaimed wood tables that probably cost more than my first apartment's rent, laughing. Actually laughing. The real kind. Not that polite chuckle she'd been giving me for months that sounded like someone remembering how laughing was supposed to work, but forgetting why. She wasn't alone. There was a guy sitting across from her. Mid-40s, probably, with that distinguished gray-at-the-temples thing that men apparently get to have, while women are expected to die away any evidence of aging. Nice watch. I could see it glinting from across the street, the kind of watch that screams, I make six figures and want everyone to know it. Decent suit, though he'd taken off the jacket and rolled up his sleeves like he was in some cologne commercial. Overall, he looked like every middle management douchebag who's ever existed, the kind of guy who says things like circle back and touch base unironically. And my wife was eating it up like it was the last meal on earth. She leaned forward, touched his arm, laughed at something he said. He smiled, that smug smile men get when they think they're clever, and said something back. Then she did something that made my blood run cold in a way that surprised me, considering I thought I was past caring. She brushed his sleeve, her fingers lingering there like a cat marking territory, slow and deliberate and intimate in a way that made it crystal clear this wasn't their first coffee date. I sat there in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching my wife flirt with some random guy in a coffee shop, like she was auditioning for a role in a movie about terrible people making terrible choices. Part of me wanted to storm in there, make a scene, flip a table, do something dramatic that would feel satisfying for about 30 seconds before the cops showed up. But I didn't, because I'm not an idiot, and more importantly, I'd learned something important over the past few days. Information is power, and revenge is a dish best served with evidence and a side of patience. So instead of confronting them, I did something way more useful. I waited. They talked for about 45 minutes, though it felt like 6 hours. At one point, he reached across the table and held her hand, and she let him, smiling like she'd just won something. The barista probably thought they were the cutest couple ever, having no idea she was watching someone's marriage get cremated in real time over $7 lattes. Finally, they got up to leave. He paid. Of course he paid, probably trying to impress her with his fancy credit card that definitely had rewards points he bragged about. They walked out together, and here's where it got interesting. They didn't kiss, didn't hug, just did that awkward shoulder touch thing that people do when they want to be affectionate, but are aware they're in public and one or both of them might be married to someone else. He walked to his car, a black BMW, naturally, because apparently everyone in this story drives a vehicle that costs more than common sense would suggest. She walked to hers. They waved at each other like teenagers after a first date, all giddy and stupid, and then they drove off in opposite directions. I followed him, not her. I already knew where she was going, probably home to continue pretending she spent Friday nights doing groceries and living a totally normal life. No, I wanted to know who this guy was, where he lived, whether he was married, whether there was a Mrs. Watch guy sitting at home wondering why her husband was late from work again. I kept a few cars back, following him like I was in some kind of low-budget spy movie. He drove through downtown, took the interstate for about 10 minutes, then exited into one of those neighborhoods where every house looked like it belonged on a magazine cover and every lawn looked like someone measured the grass with a ruler. Old money neighborhood. The kind of place where people had HOAs with actual power and probably held meetings about what color you could paint your mailbox. He pulled into a driveway of this massive colonial-style house that probably had more bathrooms than most people have rooms. White with black shutters, perfectly maintained garden, double garage, the whole suburban dream package. I parked down the street, far enough away that I wasn't obvious, but close enough to see what happened next. And then she appeared. A woman came out of the house, elegant, maybe late 30s, wearing yoga pants and a cardigan like she'd just come from teaching a class on how to be effortlessly put together. She had this calm energy about her, the kind of woman who probably volunteered at charity events and made homemade cookies that actually tasted good. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was smiling as she walked up to the car. He got out, and she kissed him. Not a peck on the cheek. A real kiss. The kind of kiss you give someone you've been married to for years and still actually like. She said something. I couldn't hear from where I was parked, but her body language read happy, comfortable, completely unaware that her husband had just spent 45 minutes flirting with another woman over overpriced coffee. I sat there watching them, and I felt this weird smile spread across my face. Not a happy smile. More like the smile you get when you're playing chess and you suddenly see 5 moves ahead and realize you're about to win. Oh, this just got Netflix-level messy, I said out loud to my empty car. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. Clean evidence. The house number clearly visible. His license plate. A few shots of him and his wife together looking all domestic and blissful. Nothing creepy or illegal, Just documentation that Mr. Fancy Watch had a whole entire life here. A whole entire wife who probably had no idea he was out there collecting side pieces like they were Pokemon cards. I didn't want revenge yet. Not the messy, immediate kind where you blow everything up and then have to deal with the fallout before you've even planned your exit strategy. No, I wanted choreography. I wanted this to be beautiful. I wanted every move planned out so perfectly that when it all came crashing down, nobody could say I acted out of anger or spite. They just have to acknowledge that I played the game better than anyone else at the table. See, most people think revenge is about destruction, about making the other person hurt as much as you hurt. But that's amateur hour. That's emotional thinking. That's the kind of revenge that gets you in trouble and doesn't actually make you feel better. Real revenge, the kind that actually means something, is about precision. It's about gathering all the pieces, understanding the whole board, and then making your move when everyone least expects it. I sat there for another 20 minutes, watching them through their kitchen window like the world's most justified stalker. They were cooking dinner together, laughing, looking like a commercial for whatever the hell normal people sell when they pretend their lives are perfect. She didn't know. The wife. Mrs. Watch Guy had no clue that her husband was out there building a backup plan in case his current life got boring. And suddenly I had this thought that hit me like lightning. I bet my wife doesn't know he's married either. I bet Mr. Fancy Watch fed her some line about being divorced or separated or single, because guys like him always do. They're not just cheaters. They're liars who cheat and then lie about the cheating, like some kind of awful Russian nesting doll of deception. I took a few more photos, made note of the address, and then drove home with the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards and nobody else has even realized the game started. The dance was about to begin, and I was going to choreograph every single step. The next day, I woke up with the kind of purpose usually reserved for people who found religion or started pyramid schemes. Except my mission was way more satisfying than selling essential oils to my friends or pretending I'd been saved. I had information, I had evidence, and I had a plan that was either going to be brilliant or land me in some kind of ethical gray area that would make my therapist earn her hourly rate. I spent the morning at work pretending to care about spreadsheets and quarterly reports while actually using my detective skills, which apparently I had, who knew, to figure out who Mr. Fancy Watch really was. A little LinkedIn stalking, some cross-referencing with the address I documented, and boom, Derek Morrison, Senior Vice President of Operations at Hutchinson and Reed Financial Services. Married to Mara Morrison for 12 years. 2 kids, based on the family photos on his Instagram that he probably should have made private if he was going to be out here collecting affairs like baseball cards. And here's the kicker that made me literally laugh out loud at my desk, causing Janet from accounting to look at me like I'd finally snapped. Hutchinson and Reed Financial Services. My wife worked there, in marketing, which meant Derek Morrison wasn't just some random guy. He was her boss, or at least in her chain of command. This wasn't a chance meeting at a coffee shop. This was workplace affair territory, which was both cliché as hell and absolutely perfect for what I was about to do. By lunch, I had Mara Morrison's phone number. Don't ask me how. Let's just say people put way too much information on social media and leave it there like they're inviting the whole world to their personal business. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my phone, trying to figure out how exactly you call someone to tell them their husband is cheating without sounding like a psycho or a prank caller. Finally, I just dialed. Rip the Band-Aid off, right? It rang 3 times. Then hello. Her voice was warm, professional, with just a hint of confusion because obviously she didn't recognize the number. Hi. Is this Mara Morrison? I asked, suddenly aware that I hadn't actually planned what I was going to say beyond the opening line. Yes, this is she. Who's calling? I took a breath. My name is Mason. Mason Porter. We've never met, but we have something in common that I think we should talk about. It involves your husband. There was a pause. The kind of pause that stretches out long enough to make you wonder if the person on the other end hung up or died or spontaneously combusted. Then, what about my husband? Her voice had changed. Less warm, more guarded. She knew. Not the details maybe, but somewhere in her gut, she knew that this call wasn't good news. Women always know. It's like they have this sixth sense that detects bullshit from 3 miles away. They just sometimes choose to ignore it because the truth is scarier than the comfortable lie. Look, this is going to sound crazy, And I promise I'm not some weirdo or a scammer or anything like that. I said, talking fast because I could feel her about to hang up. But I think our spouses are having an affair. My wife works at Hutchinson and Reed. Derek Morrison is her boss. And yesterday I watched them have coffee together at Catalyst, and it was not the kind of coffee that's covered in the employee handbook, if you know what I mean. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear her breathing, could practically hear her brain working through this information, deciding whether to believe the random stranger on the phone or hang up and pretend this conversation never happened. How do I know you're not just some crazy person? She finally asked, but her voice cracked a little on the word crazy, and I knew she was already halfway to believing me. Because crazy people don't usually have photos, I said. I've got pictures from yesterday. Him and my wife at the coffee shop. Him coming home to you. I followed him. I know that sounds insane, and maybe it is, but I needed to know who he was. And when I saw you kiss him in the driveway, when I saw that he had this whole life with you, I realized you deserve to know what he's doing when he's supposedly working late. Silence. Then, send me the photos. I did. Right there, sitting in my car, I texted her 3 pictures that told the whole story. Derek and my wife laughing at the coffee shop, her touching his arm, him holding her hand, and then one of him and Mara in their driveway, looking like a couple in a life insurance commercial, completely oblivious to the fact that their marriage was about to become a case study in irony. My phone rang 30 seconds later. Where can we meet? She asked, and her voice was different now. Harder, like steel wrapped in silk. This was a woman who'd just had her worst suspicions confirmed and was already moving into action mode instead of falling apart mode. I liked her immediately. There's a park on Riverside Drive. Quiet. Public enough that you won't think I'm gonna murder you, but private enough that we can talk, I suggested. 2 hours. I'll be there. She hung up before I could respond, which was fair. I'd just blown up her life via phone call. She probably needed those 2 hours to process, to rage, to cry, or to do whatever people do when they find out their spouse is a lying piece of garbage with good credit and a nice watch. I showed up 15 minutes early because I'm anxious like that, and spent the time sitting on a bench watching joggers and dog walkers go by. All of them probably dealing with their own drama, but at least having the decency to do it in private instead of involving strangers via phone calls. She arrived exactly on time, which told me she was the kind of person who valued punctuality even when her life was imploding. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair down now instead of in that ponytail, and she was carrying a travel mug that probably said something inspirational on it like, "World's most undervalued wife," though I couldn't see the actual text from where I was sitting. I stood up as she approached, and we did that awkward thing where neither of us knew whether to shake hands or just stand there like 2 people who'd matched on the world's worst dating app. "Mason?" she asked, even though it was pretty obvious it was me since I was the only person standing around looking like I was waiting for someone. "That's me," I said. "Mara," she nodded, and we sat down on the bench, both of us staring straight ahead at first like we were strangers on a bus who accidentally made eye contact, and now had to pretend the other person didn't exist. "So," she said finally, "tell me everything." And I did. I told her about my wife pulling away, about the coffee shop, about following Derek home, about realizing he'd been lying to everyone. I showed her more photos on my phone, and with each one, I could see her face getting tighter, her jaw clenching harder, her knuckles going white around that travel mug. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I suspected something was off. He's been distant, working late all the time, showering as soon as he gets home, which he never used to do. All the classic signs, you know. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was one of those crazy wives who sees cheating everywhere." She laughed, but it was bitter. Turns out I wasn't crazy enough. "Yeah, well, my wife's been treating me like I'm radioactive for months," I said. "Now I know why. Can't exactly touch your husband with affection when you're too busy planning coffee dates with your boss." Mara turned to look at me for the first time, really look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that matched what I was feeling, not just anger or hurt, but this cold, calculating determination. "So what do you want to do about it?" she asked. "Honestly, I want them to face consequences," I said. "Not in some crazy, key their cars kind of way, but real consequences. The kind where they can't just sweep this under the rug and move on like nothing happened." She nodded slowly, and I could see the wheels turning. Derek's company has a strict policy about relationships between supervisors and subordinates. It's a firing offense. At minimum, it's grounds for disciplinary action and transfer. So if someone were to report this to HR, I said, letting the sentence hang there, it would be investigated. Thoroughly. She smiled, and it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just figured out how to win a game they didn't even know they were playing. I know people in HR. We're friendly. We have drinks sometimes. I've been to the company holiday parties for 12 years. We make a pretty good team for two people who just met, I said. Trauma bonding, she replied. It's very efficient. She took a sip from her mug, which I could now see actually did say something on it. Nevertheless, she persisted. Perfect. We talked for another hour, making plans, comparing notes, building a strategy that felt less like revenge and more like justice with really good timing. We exchanged numbers, agreed to keep each other updated, and made a pact that we'd handle this like adults, cold, calculating adults who were done being played for fools. As we were about to leave, I said, you know, if someone had told me a week ago that I'd be plotting corporate espionage with a stranger in a park, I would have said they were nuts. Mara smiled. A real smile this time, small but genuine. If someone had told me my husband was cheating with his subordinate, I would have said they had the wrong guy. Derek's too boring to have an affair. She shook her head. Guess boring people surprise you. Revenge? I asked, testing the word. She considered it for a moment, then shook her head. No. Closure. But I'm not against applause when this all goes down. We shook hands then, like business partners sealing a deal, which I guess we were. Partners in the business of ending our respective marriages with dignity and making sure the people who betrayed us didn't get to just walk away clean. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. We'll coordinate timing. Make sure we're both ready. Sounds like a plan. She walked to her car, a sensible Honda, because of course she was the responsible one while her husband drove around in his midlife crisis BMW. I watched her go, and I realized something. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally. Someone who understood exactly what I was going through because she was going through it too. It felt professional, clinical even, but it was about to get very, very personal. At exactly 6 p.m. on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday, because dramatic revelations should happen on the most boring day of the week for maximum ironic effect, Mara knocked on my door. I'd spent the entire day at work pretending to care about reports and emails while actually running through the plan in my head about 17,000 times, making sure every detail was perfect. This wasn't something you could half-ass. This was theater, and we were about to put on the performance of a lifetime. I opened the door, and there she was, looking calm and composed in dark jeans and a gray blazer like she was attending a business meeting instead of about to detonate two marriages simultaneously. She was holding a folder, the evidence, all printed out and organized because Mara was apparently the kind of person who color-coded her revenge. You ready for this? I asked, letting her in. I've been ready since I found a receipt for jewelry in his car 3 months ago that I never received, she said, walking into my living room and setting the folder down on the coffee table like it was a briefcase full of nuclear codes. Where's your wife? Still at work. She texted me an hour ago saying she'd be home by 6:15. Traffic on the interstate, apparently. I made air quotes around traffic because at this point, everything my wife said sounded like a lie, even when she was probably telling the truth. Derek thinks I'm at book club, Mara said, and something about the way she said it made me laugh. Here we were, two betrayed spouses, and we were both using the same excuses our partners probably used when they were sneaking around. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. We sat down on the couch, and for a minute, neither of us said anything. This was it, the point of no return. Once my wife walked through that door and saw Mara sitting in our living room, there was no taking this back, no pretending it never happened, no smoothing things over with apologies and promises to work on the marriage. This was the nuclear option, and we both had our fingers on the button. You know what's weird? I said, breaking the silence. I'm not even nervous. I thought I'd be freaking out right now, but I just feel calm. Mara nodded. That's because you already grieved the marriage. You've been grieving it for months, watching it die in slow motion. This is just making it official. She was right. I'd been mourning my marriage since that first flinch in the kitchen, maybe even before that. This wasn't an ending. It was just the acknowledgement that things had ended a long time ago, and we'd all been too cowardly or comfortable to admit it. At 6:17, because my wife was never on time for anything except apparently coffee dates with her boss, I heard her car pull into the driveway. Keys jingling. The front door opening. Her usual sigh that she did every time she came home, like walking into her own house, was somehow exhausting. "Mason," she called out, probably expecting me to be in the kitchen or the guest room or anywhere except sitting in the living room with a stranger who was about to ruin her entire week. "In here." I called back, and I heard her footsteps on the hardwood floor, getting closer. She walked into the living room, still looking at her phone, probably texting Derek about how she'd successfully made it home without her idiot husband suspecting anything. Then she looked up. Her face did this thing that I wish I'd recorded because it was absolutely priceless. Her eyes went wide, her mouth dropped open, and all the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug and her blood just decided to evacuate. She looked at Mara, then at me, then back at Mara, her brain clearly trying to process what was happening and coming up with error messages. "Who is she?" she yelled, and her voice cracked on the last word, which would have been satisfying if this whole thing wasn't so pathetically predictable. I smiled, actually smiled, like I was hosting a dinner party and introducing guests. "Honey, meet Mara Morrison. Mara, this is my wife, whose name you already know because I've complained about her extensively over the past few days." My wife's jaw hit the floor so hard I'm pretty sure it left a dent. Even gravity said, "Ouch," and tried to look away out of respect for her dignity, which was currently circling the drain. "Morrison," my wife repeated, and I could see the exact moment it clicked. Her face went from confused to horrified to caught red-handed in about 2 seconds flat. "Wait, you're Derek's wife," Mara finished, her voice calm and cold like she was reading a weather report about someone else's disaster. "Yes." Surprised? "Don't be. Mason and I have been comparing notes." Mara pulled out her phone with the efficiency of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. She started scrolling through photos, my wife and Derek at the coffee shop, texting screenshots, restaurant receipts, all organized chronologically like a timeline of terrible decisions. "That's not. We were just. It's not what it looks like," my wife stammered, running through the greatest hits of cheater excuses like she was reading from a script that every guilty person in history has used. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said, standing up and crossing my arms. "Unless you're going to tell me that holding hands with your married boss over $7 lattes is part of some new corporate team-building exercise I haven't heard about." She tried a different approach, switching tactics like a politician in a losing debate. "It was just friendly. We're friends. Derek's been mentoring me at work." "Mentoring," Mara repeated, and she said the word like it tasted bad. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because I've seen the text messages, sweetheart. Derek's not great at deleting things. And unless I can't stop thinking about you is the new corporate motto at Hutchinson and Reed. I think we can drop the mentorship story." My wife's face cycled through about 15 different emotions. Panic, anger, embarrassment, more panic. She looked at me like I was the villain in this scenario, like I'd somehow wronged her by discovering her affair and having the audacity to confront her about it with witnesses. "This is crazy," she said, her voice going shrill. "You followed me? You stalked my boss. That's psychotic, Mason." "Psychotic would be pretending I didn't see what I saw," I said calmly, enjoying this way more than I probably should have. This is just efficient. Call it what you want, but at the end of the day, you got caught. And unlike you, I didn't need to lie about where I was or who I was with to figure out the truth." She turned to Mara, maybe thinking she could find sympathy there, some kind of woman-to-woman understanding. "Look, I don't know what he told you, but he told me the truth," Mara interrupted, standing up now too. "And then he showed me proof. And then I went through my husband's phone and found even more proof. So unless you're about to tell me that all of this is some elaborate deepfake conspiracy, I suggest you save your breath." My wife stuttered through every excuse in the book: charity work, company projects, stress relief, therapy recommendations from Derek, ghost of Christmas past. Probably would have blamed the moon cycle if she thought we'd buy it. Each excuse was more desperate than the last, and watching her scramble was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. "We never slept together," she finally shouted, like that was somehow the trump card that would make everything okay. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, The kind of laugh that comes from the depths of your soul when something is so absurd it breaks your brain. Oh, well in that case, let me just cancel this whole intervention. Honey, you only emotionally cheated with your married boss. That's totally fine. My bad. Mara wasn't laughing though. She was just watching my wife with this expression of pure disgust, like she was looking at something she found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. You know what the worst part is? Mara said quietly. It's not even the affair. It's the lying. The sneaking around. The fact that you both looked at your spouses every single day and chose to betray us while pretending everything was normal. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up a glass of water I'd poured earlier, because hydration is important, even during emotional warfare. I took a sip, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably, watching my wife squirm under the weight of her own terrible choices. So here's how this is gonna go, I said finally, setting the glass down with deliberate care. You're going to pack your things. Tonight. Right now, actually. You're going to leave, and you're going to figure out where you're staying, because it's not here. Not anymore. You can't just kick me out, she protested. This is my house too. Actually, the house is in my name because your credit was garbage when we bought it, I reminded her pleasantly. But nice try. And before you start crying about your rights or whatever, just remember that I have photographic evidence of your affair with your supervisor, which I'm sure a lawyer would find very interesting during divorce proceedings. She opened her mouth to argue, but Mara cut her off. And I'll be filing for divorce too, and reporting this to HR at Hutchinson and Reed, because last I checked, supervisor-subordinate relationships violate company policy. So you might want to start updating your resume. My wife looked between us, and I could see it finally sinking in. This wasn't a fight she could win. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of, or explain away, or minimize until we all just agreed to forget about it. This was real consequences for real actions, and she was about to learn what accountability felt like. You've been promoted, I said calmly, smiling like I'd just given her good news. To single. Congratulations. You earned it. The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. Sweet, delicious silence that tasted better than anything I'd experienced in months. No excuses, no explanations, no desperate attempts to rewrite history. Just quiet acceptance that the jig was up and the curtain was falling. Finally, my wife turned and ran upstairs, and I could hear her in the bedroom, slamming drawers and probably crying. Though honestly, I was too busy feeling relieved to care much about her emotional state. Mara looked at me and gave a small nod. Well, she said, that went exactly as planned. Better, actually, I said. I didn't think she'd try the mentorship excuse. That was a nice touch. We both smiled. Not happy smiles, but satisfied ones. The smiles of people who just finished a job well done and were ready to move on to the next chapter of their lives. She thundered up the stairs like a tornado with feelings, and for the next 30 minutes, Mara and I sat in my living room listening to the symphony of drawers slamming, hangers scraping, and what sounded like someone having a complete emotional breakdown set to the soundtrack of aggressive packing. At one point, something crashed, probably that ceramic vase her mother gave us that I always hated anyway, and Mara raised her eyebrows at me like, should we check on that? But I just shook my head. Some things need to break, and honestly, that vase was ugly as hell. When she finally came back downstairs, she was dragging 2 suitcases that looked like they'd been packed by someone having a panic attack in the dark. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair was a mess, and she had that wild look people get when they're running on pure adrenaline and poor life choices. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and glared at both of us with the kind of hatred usually reserved for people who spoil TV shows or talk during movies. You'll regret this, she spat out, her voice shaking with either rage or tears or both. Both of you. You'll regret being so cruel. I stood up slowly, deliberately, and walked over to her with my hands in my pockets like I was the most relaxed person in the world. You know what I actually regret? I said conversationally. I regret not doing this 6 months ago when I first noticed you pulling away. I regret wasting time trying to fix something you'd already decided to break. But this, I gestured around at the scene we'd just created. This I'm gonna sleep real well about. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, and now she was playing the victim card, which was bold considering she'd just been caught red-handed in an affair with her married boss. I don't know. Your sister's place? A hotel? Derek's BMW? Honestly, that's a you problem now, I said, channeling every ounce of not my circus, not my monkey's energy I could muster. But I can tell you where you're not going, and that's back upstairs into what used to be our bedroom. She looked at Mara, maybe hoping for some female solidarity or sympathy, but Mara just smiled that cold smile she perfected over the last hour and said, "Don't look at me. I'm dealing with my own cheating spouse situation. You two can carpool to Consequenceville for all I care." My wife grabbed her suitcases with the kind of dramatic flair that would have won her an Oscar if this were a movie and not just her life falling apart in real time. She dragged them to the door, struggling because she'd apparently overpacked. Shocker, and turned around one last time. "You know what? I hope you're happy together," she said, her voice dripping with venom and the implication that Mara and I were somehow the real villains in this story. "We're not together, you walnut," I said, unable to help myself. "We're just two people who got cheated on by your boyfriend and decided to compare notes. Not everything is a romance. Sometimes it's just shared trauma and good timing. Whatever helps you sleep at night," she muttered, yanking open the door. "Actually, not having a cheater in my bed is what's going to help me sleep at night," I called after her. "That, and maybe some melatonin. I hear it works wonders." She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled, and then we heard her struggling with the suitcases down the front steps, cursing under her breath. Her car door slammed, the engine started, and then she was gone, leaving nothing but the smell of her perfume and the faint echo of terrible decisions. I turned to Mara, and we both just stood there for a second in the sudden quiet. Then she started laughing. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of slightly hysterical laugh people do when they've just been through something intense and their brain doesn't know how else to process it. "That was," she started, trying to find the words. "Incredible," I offered. "Satisfying. Better than therapy. All of the above," she said, wiping her eyes. "God, I needed that. I needed to see his face when he realizes his whole life is about to implode." "Speaking of which," I said, pulling out my phone, "what time does Derek usually get home?" "Around 7:30. If he's actually coming straight from work and not making detours to coffee shops with subordinates," she said, her voice hardening again. I looked at the time. 6:53. "You should probably head home. Get there before he does. That way you can have everything set up nice for him." She nodded, grabbing her purse and the folder of evidence. "I'll text you after. Let you know how it goes. I'll be waiting with popcorn," I said, walking her to the door. She paused on the porch and turned back to me. "Thanks, Mason, for calling me, for not just letting this slide. We deserved better than what they gave us," I said simply. "Sometimes you gotta take out your own trash." She smiled, a real smile this time, and headed to her sensible Honda. I watched her drive away, and then I closed the door and stood in my suddenly very quiet house. It felt different already. Lighter. Like someone had opened all the windows and let out air that had been going stale for months. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room, which was now just going to be my room, I guess, and felt more rested than I had in weeks. No tension, no tiptoeing around someone's mood, no wondering if today would be the day she'd finally just admit she didn't want to be married anymore. Just peace. Glorious, uncomplicated peace. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and called the HR department at Hutchinson and Reed. A woman named Patricia answered, sounding way too cheerful for 8:30 in the morning. "Hi, Patricia, this is Mason Porter. I'm calling to report a policy violation involving 2 employees at your company," I said, keeping my voice professional and calm like I was ordering a pizza instead of potentially ending 2 careers. "Oh," she said, her cheerfulness dimming considerably. "What kind of violation?" "The kind where a senior vice president is having an inappropriate relationship with someone he directly supervises," I said. "Derek Morrison and my soon-to-be ex-wife. I have documentation if you need it." There was a pause while she processed that bomb. Yes, we would need documentation. This is a serious allegation. I understand. I can email everything over within the hour. Photos, text message screenshots, the works. My ex-wife's name is Rachel Porter. She's in your marketing department." "Mr. Porter, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention," Patricia said, and now she sounded like she was already mentally preparing for the nightmare of paperwork and investigations this was going to create. "We take these matters very seriously. I'll need to forward this to our ethics committee and our legal department." "You do what you need to do," I said pleasantly. I'm just a concerned citizen making sure company policy is being followed. Have a great day, Patricia. I hung up and immediately forwarded all the evidence to the HR email address Patricia had given me. Photos, timestamps, everything organized and labeled like I was submitting a college thesis on how to catch your spouse being trash, a case study. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Mara. Derek's been suspended pending investigation. He's losing his mind, currently yelling about lawsuits and privacy violations. I'm enjoying my coffee and watching him spiral. This is therapeutic. Me. That was efficient. Mara. I'm a woman who believes in customer service. When I deliver consequences, I deliver them on time and under budget. I sent back a laughing emoji, the honest kind, not the sarcastic, I'm dead inside, one I'd been using for months whenever my wife sent me those passive-aggressive texts about forgetting to buy milk or whatever minor infraction I'd committed that day. Me, how are you doing? Really? Mara, honestly? I'm okay. Better than okay. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in months. Derek's in the guest room. I've called a lawyer, and I'm pretty sure this is the beginning of my villain arc. Me. Villain arcs are underrated. Very empowering. Mara, right? I should have been a villain years ago. Heroes are exhausting, and nobody appreciates them. I smiled at my phone, feeling that weird camaraderie you get with someone when you've been through battle together. Even if the battle was just exposing two cheaters and watching their lives implode in real time. It wasn't romance, wasn't even really friendship yet. Just two people who understood exactly what the other was going through because they were living it simultaneously. The rest of the day, I got texts from various people. Jerry saying he heard through the grapevine that Rachel had moved in with her sister and was telling everyone I'd forced her out. Tom from the barbecue awkwardly asking if I was okay. Even my mom calling, because apparently news travels fast when your marriage explodes. To everyone, I gave the same answer. I'm good. Really good. Better than I've been in a long time. And the crazy thing? It was true. I wasn't just saying it to make people feel better or to pretend I was handling things well. I actually felt good. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying around a backpack full of someone else's problems and finally realized I could just put it down and walk away. That night, I ordered pizza, watched a movie I actually wanted to watch instead of whatever reality TV garbage Rachel always insisted on, and went to bed at a reasonable hour in my own room that smelled like my cologne and not her perfume. And I slept like a baby who'd just discovered the concept of boundaries and decided they were pretty great actually. A week later, 7 glorious days of sleeping peacefully, eating what I wanted, and not having to explain my whereabouts to someone who'd spent months lying about theirs. Rachel showed up at my door with a pie. An actual pie. Like we were living in some 1950s sitcom where baked goods fixed broken marriages and infidelity could be swept under the rug with the right amount of whipped cream and apologies. I was in the middle of my second coffee, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right." A gift from Jerry that had never been more appropriate when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, and there she was, holding what appeared to be an apple pie and wearing this expression that was probably supposed to look apologetic, but mostly just looked uncomfortable, like she'd eaten something that disagreed with her and was trying to smile through the stomach cramps. I debated not answering, just standing there in silence until she gave up and left, taking her weaponized pie with her. But curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I wanted to see what kind of manipulation tactics she'd try now that the initial shock had worn off, and she'd had time to workshop her approach with her sister and whatever enabling friend she had left. I opened the door, but didn't step aside to let her in. Just stood there in the doorway like a bouncer at a club who'd already decided you weren't getting past the velvet rope. "Hey," she said, her voice doing that soft, vulnerable thing that women do when they're trying to seem harmless and reasonable. "Can we talk? Like adults?" I almost laughed. "We are adults," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "That's exactly why I'm not pretending to forget what happened just because you showed up with carbs." She held up the pie like it was evidence in her defense. "I made your favorite. Apple, with that lattice crust you like. I thought we could sit down and just talk. Really talk. Without all the anger and drama." "My favorite is actually cherry," I said, because it was, and she would have known that if she'd paid attention to literally anything about me in the last 3 years. "But points for effort, I guess. Very thoughtful of you to bake for the husband you cheated on." Her face twitched, just a little, but I caught it. That micro-expression that said she was already getting annoyed that I wasn't playing along with her redemption arc. Mason, please. Can I just come in? 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I considered it for exactly 2 seconds, then stepped out onto the porch instead, pulling the door mostly closed behind me. Porch only, I said firmly. New rule. You want to talk? We talk out here where the neighbors can see us, and I can go back inside whenever I decide this conversation is over. She blinked at me like her Wi-Fi was buffering, trying to process that I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Are you serious right now? Deadly, I said, crossing my arms. You wanted to talk like adults? Adults have boundaries. This is mine. Porch or nothing. She let out this dramatic sigh that could have powered a small wind turbine and sat down on the porch steps, setting the pie next to her like a sad consolation prize no one wanted. I stayed standing, leaning against the railing, maintaining my position of power in this negotiation I hadn't agreed to participate in. I miss you, she started, and I had to actively stop myself from rolling my eyes so hard they'd get stuck that way. I miss us. I miss our life together. Which part? I asked conversationally. The part where you were sleeping with your boss, or the part where you treated me like I was radioactive every time I tried to touch you? I'm curious which version of US you're nostalgic for, because from where I'm standing, neither sounds particularly worth missing. I wasn't sleeping with him, she insisted, like that technicality somehow made everything fine. We never actually. Yeah. You never slept together. You just had an emotional affair, held hands, texted constantly, and lied to me for months about where you were and who you were with. I interrupted. That's so much better. You're absolutely right. I should definitely take you back based on that totally convincing defense. She tried to reach for my arm. That same manipulative touch she probably used on Derek to make him think he was special, but I stepped back before she made contact. Her hand hovered in the air for a second before dropping back to her lap like a dead fish. Don't, I said simply. That doesn't work anymore. You really love your rules, don't you? She snapped. And there it was, the real Rachel, breaking through the carefully constructed nice girl facade like the Kool-Aid man through a wall. Everything has to be your way now. Your boundaries, your conditions, your timeline. Yeah, I said, not even trying to hide my smile. Turns out when you rebuild your life after someone tries to burn it down, you get to make the rules. Funny how that works. You're being unreasonable, she said, pulling out her favorite weapon, making me feel like I was the problem, like my totally justified response to her betrayal was somehow the real issue here. No, I'm being self-aware, I corrected her. There's a difference. Self-aware people recognize when they're being manipulated and choose not to participate. Unreasonable people would be out here yelling and throwing things. I'm just standing here, calmly declining your invitation to get hurt again. She stood up then, brushing off her jeans with aggressive swipes like she was trying to brush off the reality that this wasn't going according to her plan. Fine. You know what? Fine. But you're going to regret this, Mason. You're going to regret not forgiving me when you had the chance. I smiled then, a real, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep in my soul where I'd apparently stored all my self-respect for safekeeping. And you'll regret thinking forgiveness comes with home delivery, I said. Forgiveness isn't something you can just order up like pizza when you decide you want it. It's earned. Through time, through changed behavior, through actual accountability. Not through showing up with a pie and puppy dog eyes and hoping I'm stupid enough to fall for it. I came here to apologize, she said, her voice rising. No, you came here to see if you could manipulate me into taking you back without actually having to do any real work or face any real consequences. I said, my voice steady. There's a difference. A real apology would acknowledge what you did wrong, take responsibility for it, and accept that there are consequences you can't negotiate your way out of. This, I gestured at her and the sad pie. This is just you testing the waters to see if I'm still the same pushover who'd accept breadcrumbs and call it a meal. Her face went through several emotions, anger, embarrassment, frustration, before settling on something that looked like defeat mixed with resentment. Not a good look, but an honest one at least. I can't believe you're throwing away 10 years of marriage over this. I'm not throwing it away, I said calmly. You threw it away when you decided your boss was more interesting than your husband. I'm just taking out the trash. There's a difference. She grabbed the pie, gripping it so hard I thought she might throw it at me. which would have been entertaining but also would have ruined my t-shirt, and marched down the steps toward her car. Halfway there, she turned around one more time, mascara starting to run because apparently she'd added crying to her performance. "I hope you're happy," she said, and it came out bitter, like the opposite of a blessing. "Getting there," I said honestly. "It's a process, but I'm making progress. Thanks for asking." I meant it sarcastically. I know. I chose to take it literally. It's called boundary setting. My therapist is very proud. She made this strangled noise that was half sob, half scream, through the pie in her passenger seat. Hopefully it survived, because someone should enjoy it even if it wasn't going to be me, and peeled out of my driveway like she was auditioning for Fast and Furious, suburban desperation. I stood on the porch for a minute, watching her taillights disappear, and waited for the guilt to hit. Waited for that voice in my head that said I should have been nicer, should have heard her out, should have given her another chance, because that's what good people do, and marriage is about forgiveness and all that Hallmark card nonsense. But it never came. Instead, I just felt relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief that I'd held my ground and not let her back in just because she showed up with baked goods and fake tears. Relief that I'd learned how to say no to people who didn't deserve yes. Relief that somewhere along the way, I'd grown a spine and decided to actually use it. I went back inside, poured myself another coffee, and texted Jerry. Ex-wife just showed up with a pie trying to reconcile. Told her porch-only policy. She left mad. Jerry, did you at least get to keep the pie? Me, nope. She took it with her. Probably going to eat her feelings in her sister's driveway. Jerry, her loss. Literally and figuratively. Proud of you, man. Me. Thanks. Therapy is expensive, but apparently worth it. Later that afternoon, I found out through the neighborhood kid who was weirdly plugged into local gossip that Rachel had given the pie to Mrs. Henderson next door. Mrs. Henderson's grandson had tried it and reported back that it was kind of dry, actually. I texted that information to Mara because she was the only person who would appreciate the poetic justice of Rachel's reconciliation pie being objectively disappointing. Mara, even her baked goods are half-assed. This is beautiful. Me. The universe has a sense of humor. Mara. The universe is doing stand-up comedy at this point. How are you holding up? Me. Better than the pie, apparently. You. Mara. Derek's lawyer sent me a very aggressive letter about harassment because I reported him to HR. My lawyer sent back an even more aggressive letter about evidence and violations of company policy. It's like watching two dogs bark at each other through a fence. Me. Entertainment value. High. Mara, exactly. I'm learning that divorce is 90% paperwork and 10% wondering why you didn't do this sooner. That night, I ordered Chinese food. The good kind, not the compromise because someone doesn't like spicy food kind, and ate it while watching a documentary about space that Rachel would have hated because she thought space was boring and pointless. And you know what? Space wasn't boring. Space was fascinating, and I was finally free enough to enjoy it. Mara and I started texting regularly after that, which sounds weird when you explain it to other people. Yeah, I'm friends with my ex-wife's affair partner's wife, but made perfect sense to us. We were two survivors with matching scars, and there's something about shared trauma that cuts through all the normal awkward getting-to-know-you phases and jumps straight to the part where you can say whatever you're thinking without fear of judgment. Our first official hangout that wasn't revenge-related happened on a Saturday morning. She texted me at 8 asking if I wanted to grab coffee, and I said yes before my brain could overthink it and make it weird. We met at a local place, not Catalyst, because neither of us wanted to relive that particular crime scene, and ordered drinks that were reasonably priced and served by people who didn't act like they were curing cancer with espresso. So this is what normal people do, Mara said, settling into her chair with a latte that had actual foam art instead of whatever pretentious nonsense the hipster places did. They just hang out, without plotting revenge or gathering evidence. Wild concept. I agreed, taking a sip of my black coffee. I almost don't know what to talk about when I'm not comparing notes on our spouse's terrible life choices. We ended up talking for 2 hours about everything except Derek and Rachel. Work, hobbies, that new documentary series everyone was watching, why grocery stores put the milk in the back, normal stuff that normal people talked about when they weren't navigating the aftermath of simultaneous divorces. It was easy, comfortable, like talking to someone who just got you without needing extensive backstory or emotional footnotes. After that, it became a thing. We'd meet up once or twice a week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks in the park where we'd first formed our alliance. No pressure, no expectations, just two people who'd been through hell and decided they liked each other's company on the way out. One afternoon, we were walking around the lake near her house. She'd kicked Derek out by then, so she actually seemed relaxed in her own neighborhood when she brought up something that had apparently been bothering her. "People keep telling me I should fight for my marriage," she said, watching a duck family paddle by like they had their lives figured out better than any of us. "My mom, some friends from church, even my hairdresser has opinions about it. They keep saying marriage is sacred, that I should try counseling, that everyone makes mistakes." I thought about that for a second, watching the ducks do their thing. "You know what fighting to keep trash doesn't make you," I finally said. She looked at me, eyebrow raised. "What? Loyal? It makes you a raccoon." She stopped walking and just stared at me for a beat. Then she started laughing. That real, from-the-belly kind of laugh that people do when something hits them exactly right. She laughed so hard, she almost dropped her coffee, and a jogger passing by gave us a concerned look like we might be having some kind of episode. "A raccoon," she repeated, wiping her eyes. "Oh my God, that's perfect. That's exactly what it would be. Just me, digging through garbage, trying to find something worth keeping. Right? Like, congratulations, you successfully defended a dumpster," I said. "What's the prize?" "More garbage." She shook her head, still grinning. "I'm using that next time my mom brings it up." "Sorry, Mom. I've decided not to be a raccoon today." That became our thing, finding humor in the absurdity of it all. Not the mean kind of humor that was really just bitterness in disguise, but genuine laughter at how ridiculous people could be, how predictable the advice was, how everyone suddenly became a marriage expert when your marriage was falling apart. We didn't need drama. We'd had enough drama to last us through retirement. What we needed was peace, and somehow, we'd found it in each other. Not in a romantic way. Neither of us was ready for that, and honestly, it would have ruined what we had. We needed friendship, the kind where you could say, "I'm having a really bad day," and the other person just showed up with coffee and didn't try to fix it or make it about them. She became my calm, the person who understood without needing explanation, who'd been through the same fire and come out the other side still standing. And apparently, I became her comic relief, the person who could make her laugh about situations that should have made us both bitter and angry. One evening, we were sitting on a bench watching the sunset. Yeah, we'd become those people, but in our defense, the sunsets were actually pretty great, when she said something that stuck with me. "You know what's weird?" she asked. "I'm happier now than I was 6 months ago when I thought my marriage was fine." "That's because ignorance isn't actually bliss," I said. "It's just ignorance with better PR." She smiled at that. "Derek's lawyer keeps pushing for mediation, keeps saying we should work it out like adults. And every time I get one of those emails, I just think about how I'm already working it out. By leaving." "Exactly. Sometimes working it out means working yourself out of a bad situation," I said. "People act like giving up on a marriage is failure, but staying in one that's killing you slowly? That's not success. That's just slow suicide with paperwork." We sat there quietly for a while, watching the sky turn orange and pink, and I realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning my next move or worrying about someone else's feelings or trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. I was just existing, peacefully, with a friend who got it. And for once in my life, I slept fine knowing tomorrow would be more of the same, calm, simple, unbothered. No drama, no games, just good coffee and clean air. Derek lost his job 3 months after the HR investigation concluded. Turns out sleeping with subordinates, or almost sleeping with them, whatever version of the story he was selling, was exactly as bad for your career as company policy suggested it would be. He tried to spin it as mutual resignation, but everyone knew the truth. Corporate doesn't let you mutually resign when you've violated ethics policies and created liability issues. They just escort you out with a cardboard box and wishes for your future endeavors that nobody actually means. Rachel lost her comfortable setup when Derek couldn't be her sugar daddy anymore, and his wife cleaned him out in divorce court. Last I heard, she was working at some startup that paid half what Hutchinson and Reed did and living with her sister, who apparently wasn't thrilled about the long-term roommate situation. The affair that was supposed to be her upgrade turned into her downgrade, which felt like the universe finally balancing its books. Me? I gained something way more valuable than revenge or vindication. I gained silence. And let me tell you, silence is priceless when you've spent years listening to someone's excuses, complaints, and the sound of your own dignity being chipped away one passive-aggressive comment at a time. I fixed my house, my peace, and my Spotify playlist. No more compromising on music. No more pretending I liked reality TV. No more walking on eggshells wondering if today would be the day she'd finally admit she checked out months ago. Just me, my space, and the beautiful quiet of not having to manage someone else's emotional chaos. Sometimes I think about that day. Me walking into my own living room with Mara, Rachel's face draining of color, her voice cracking as she yelled, "Who is she?" Like she was the victim in a story where she'd been cast as the villain. I remember the look on her face when I said, calm as Sunday morning, "Meet your boss's wife." That silence should have won an Oscar. Best supporting silence in a drama. The kind of quiet that speaks louder than any scripted confrontation ever could. Now, when people ask how I moved on, and they do ask, because apparently everyone's fascinated by divorce when it's not theirs, I give them the same answer every time. I didn't move on. I just moved up. Up from being treated like an afterthought. Up from accepting breadcrumbs of affection. Up from believing that loyalty meant staying in something that was slowly killing who I used to be. Mara and I still grab coffee every week. Still laugh about the absurdity of it all. She's dating now, some guy who owns a bookstore and has never cheated on anyone, which she says is a refreshingly low bar, but one she's grateful for anyway. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. Learning to trust again, learning to like myself again, learning that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone anyway. Every night, I brush my teeth beside the man in the mirror, and here's the thing. He's smiling now. Really smiling. Not that fake smile you give people when they ask how you're doing and you lie through your teeth. A real smile. The smile of someone who's calm, unbothered, and finally free. I look at that guy and think, you did it. You walked through fire and didn't let it burn you to ash. You chose yourself when everyone else chose comfort over truth. And every single night, that guy in the mirror looks back at me and nods. Because we both know the truth now. The best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's becoming so completely fine without them that their absence becomes irrelevant. And brother, I've never been more irrelevantly happy in my entire life.